for quite a while. Thank you, General, for bailing me out.
Welcome, Prof. It's a pleasure to see you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Welcome, Professor Ayotunde. It's always a pleasure to be with you. It's been a long time.
Thank you so much. You are most welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Lucky, how are you?
I'm doing great, sir. I have been very busy, but I'm okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.
And how about you?
I'm good. So we are going to begin the technical difficulties pushed us back a little bit. I'm sorry for that. Please, just to remind us that once we are not speaking or identified to speak, even though we do have the control over the mics and the video, we would suggest that you please mute your mic, and probably to reduce the bandwidth usage, also please put off your video so that we can all hear each other effectively. I know it's very early morning in this part of the world and afternoon in many other places. So we are going to start with thank you very much. I want to thank General Ishola Williams, Panabstrag, Madam Aniola Bello, and all who have worked behind the scene to make this happen. Thank you very much. Our colleagues from everywhere who are already in, we thank you. It's a sacrifice many of us are making to be part of this. Thank you so much. The program is very clear, and we are going to go to the first item in the program, which is Pan-Abstract greetings, which will be given by Professor Thiam, Sheikh Thiam from Amherst University, one of our stars, doing great work. So over to you, Professor Thiam.
Thank you, Prof, for your kind words. It's always a pleasure to see you and to speak with you. If we are here today, it's thanks to people like you, and you in particular in my own case. So thank you everybody for joining us to this wonderful conference. Most Honorable PJ Patterson, Her Excellency Dr. Maureen Temuno, General Ishola Williams, Prof. Bewaji, Madam Bello, and all colleagues who are here with us. Warm greetings from Amherst and from Senegal. We all wish we were in sunny Jamaica and not in below 0 degree right now. So on behalf of Pan-Abstract, the Academy of African Indigenous Religious Theology and Arts, and the PG Patterson Institute for African and Caribbean Advocacy, I would like to welcome you to this important moment in our shared histories of engagement with knowledge production from a Black studies perspective. This conference on global Black studies in Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America is consistent with the mission of Pan-Abstract and our engagement to think about Africa and the world from a Pan-African perspective. The title, Global African Studies, is at the same time, I think, a political and a heuristic stand. It is a political stand precisely because the act of speaking itself is for people of African descent, a moment of proclamation of our humanity. When in the late 1980s, Mudimbe, V.Y. Mudimbe, changed the course of Black studies with the publication of The Invention of Africa, his major intervention was, after all, to situate the geography of reason. He showed that Africa did not exist per se. It was invented by a certain tradition of discourses and practices that imagined it as the other of the European self. Most importantly, these discourses excluded the African precisely because we were not deemed human, and therefore we were unable to produce audible speech. It is in this vein that the original land of our humanity was discovered. For this reason, our prise de parole here is a cleansing statement, as it is a philopraxis of our humanity. Conferences such as this one are not only important for the engagement with the very meaning of our identity, but they are also crucial for the imagination of African futures. The title, Global African Studies, is a heuristic stand, as it is an invitation to engage with the pervasiveness of modernity and to present African studies not as the study of Africa only, understood as a geographical space, but as a study of the world from an African perspective. Africa is thus to be understood as an idea or a theoretical and conceptual dimension rather than a mere geographical space. Global Africa, for this reason, is not just a heuristic stand, it is a method of inquiry that calls for pluriversals, thinking from interstices, and as the possibilities of engaging with the world that does not create and push forth meta-narratives or single stories. It does not either, in the same vein of our African religions, develop generalizing and universalizing discourses. Rather, we engage with possibilities of meaning that celebrates our lived experiences, continuities and discontinuities, and pluriversalities, as opposed to the universalizing forces of modernity. It is in this light that we have gathered here, virtually, delegates from all 6 regions of the continent, ready to think together for our place in the world. The unfortunate nature of a virtual gathering rather than an in-person meeting is full of teachings. It shows, beyond the exaggerated valuation of materiality, the importance of connections rooted in the African ontologies of life. We are more than one can see. And together, we form a strong community based on kinship, celebrating our passage in this market and moving towards stronger physical and spiritual ties. These ties, founded on kinship, are the marks of our African humanities. If you are based on the continent, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and anywhere else in global Africa. Having this conference in the Caribbean is particularly important in that, as opposed to the representations of islands as a closed space, they are essentially places where African ontologies and epistemologies were kept alive and where they have framed, organized, and enabled our path towards fuller humanities. Islands are routes, links, spaces of productions of possibilities. Just like life in the Yoruba sense of the term, islands are spaces of passage. Passage, the ephemeral nature of this process, is reminiscent of African world senses as opposed to the ontology of fixity rooted in the modern philosophical tradition. As Edouard Glissant shows in his opus, islands are spaces of entanglement and therefore meaning-making coming from rhizomatic spaces. For this, they are, as Aimé Césaire implies, places where the Black man stood still and screamed Uhuru for the first time since the occupation of our lands. In less esoteric ways, islands are places where Africa has been preserved, and one can even argue reinvented constantly to the point that they participated in transforming African cultures. One does not need to go further than the way Afrobeats is changing the culture of the continent today, and how young Nigerians, Afropolitans, rethought and reconceptualized African music, style, fashion, being through the islands, and to be precise, Jamaica. If elders such as Prof. Tunde Bewaji have decided to settle there, it is because this place is also home. Ancestors are born every day. I happen to understand time as what it is, a mere tool to make sense of life. The time of the clock is a measurable desire, is a measuring, is a device of measurement that allow us to measure the distance between 2 points in time. So if taken for what it is, time can be useful even to us. Rather than the teleology that has dominated discourses on time since the modern era, we can understand time in a way that allows us to conceive reality as filling the same purpose. It is in this sense that one can go beyond the understanding that Africa is a place before the Middle Passage. One can argue that Africa is a place that offers hints to its members. In this sense, Africa is where Africans, where you all are, Africans from communities that facilitate our passage in this world. So let us today engage each other with love, peace, and spirituality, and in the name of those who came before us, gather in this virtual place to continue the work of our ancestors. I predict a wonderful feast, and I'm excited to learn about legal challenges in the 6th region, education reform in Francophone Africa, and knowledge production in African spaces and methods of inquiry in Botswana. Where else can you imagine such a diverse and inclusive way of engaging with the world? Where can you, in the same space, engage with hairstyles in face of the global industry, trade and migration, and historical movements before Columbus, or Igbo presence in the Caribbean? Where else can you do it than in a place like this, Global Africa? So thank you. Thank you all for being here with us, ready to produce and share knowledge, learn and celebrate each other, and conceptualize and imagine our future. Jerejef.
Thank you very much, Professor Tiam. That is a wonderful entree into our program. We're exceedingly grateful. The second item on the agenda on the program is an overview of the colloquium, which is to be done by your humble servant here. But I will not be doing anything lengthy, just to give a few remarks before we take His Most Honorable Statesman in Residence, P.J. Patterson's opening lecture. The colloquium has had a history spanning over 2 years in planning. In the process of planning, we had a number of hiccups, changes in host institutions, bereavements along the way. Is the tenacity of General Ishola Williams and some of us who believe that this particular colloquium is essential, given what we know and what we don't know, that had made it possible for us to be here today. During the last major events, global event, the World Cup, people were surprised that there were no Blacks in the Argentina team. But very few people know that Argentina made it official state policy to hunt to the ground and kill, totally exterminate the Black population in Argentina, unlike in other countries in the Americas where Blacks can be found. Those who did not want to be killed, who were Blacks in Argentina, had to run away to other more welcoming environments. Also, most of us don't know that millions of Blacks were transported to the Arabian during the trans-Sahara slave trade. And if you wonder why it is that the Black population in the Arabia is a void, you don't need to look further. People lament the treatment of Blacks in the Americas as horrendous, but Blacks have survived in various ways. In the Arabian Peninsula, Blacks, especially women, had hysterectomy performed on them and their men castrated so that there would be no evidence of Blackness in the Arabian Peninsula. Few people know about that. Just this morning, I was listening to something that came from Australia, a speech given by an Aborigine, the indigenous group in Australia, showing graphically how his ancestors had to survive the extermination projects of the European, especially British migrants to Australia. So doing a conference on global African studies is very, very important to correct the miseducation, the ignorance about global African culture, global African history, and global African humanity. The ignorance is not just among the diaspora. Also, the ignorance is embarrassing among our own people of continental African domicile. So I want to welcome you, but I'll ask us to do a moment of silence in the memory of two of our stalwarts who passed away in the process of planning and having this colloquium. One of them is Professor, one of our very wonderful scholars who died, who was murdered. I don't know where exactly, but that's, I'm trying to get he contributed a presentation to this conference, which is also slated in our program, which he has submitted his full paper, which I plan to put on for us so that we can all see that paper to let us know the commitment which we had from him. That's Professor Marinos Chijioke Iwuchukwu. He died suddenly, he was murdered, according to the information. He was somebody who was an advocate of global religious tolerance. So he's one. The second one is our own ambassador, Professor Richard Bernal, who died on January 4 this year, while this colloquium was being planned. So please join me in observing 1 minute of silence for these great men who have transitioned into ancestorhood. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to share the presentation by His Most Honorable Statesman in Residence, Prime Minister Emeritus, Percival James Patterson. He was the longest serving Prime Minister of Jamaica. He was one of the stalwarts who fought in the trenches against apartheid in the ACP, as well as non-aligned movement. He's a bosom friend of our own Olusegun Obasanjo, as well as other elder statesmen in Africa. He's a leader who has founded the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. He's bringing us greetings. He needs no introduction, but it's my humble job to bring you his greetings, which is pre-recorded. I will share the screen now, and it will make that presentation. Can we? Can we see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Caribbean and Jamaican advocates transition while working assiduously on this colloquium.
We can't hear anything again, Paul. Did you mute?
As a regular subject in our systems, or even in informal settings. So,
can we hear?
Yes, sir. We can hear now. Yes, we can hear now. Thank you.
Okay.
You need to leave your mic on, sir.
Eh?
You need to leave your mic on for us to hear.
Okay. I'm going to.
in my welcoming remarks, by paying tribute to the memory of a good stalwart of African, Caribbean, and Jamaican advocacy, transition while working assiduously on this colloquium. Professor the Honorable Ambassador Richard Bernal, a true son and scholar of Jamaica and Africa. Friends, global studies in Latin America and the Caribbean is seldom known or taught as a regular subject of statistics, or even in informal settings. Many of us do not realize that the near 8 billion people inhabit planets or space human beings. What is known and taught in the educational curriculum on this side of the pond is mostly distilled through Eurocentric lenses of plantation slavery, racism, and colonialism. Know very little about their kith and kin in other parts of the world. For children resident in other parts of the world know very little about the historical greatness and exploits of Africa, which led to the evolution of the world over hundreds of years. In my welcoming remarks and exploits of Africa, which led to the evolution of the world over hundreds of thousands of years ago. In the Americas and in Africa, know that Africans were purveyors of science, technology, civilization, and development in Europe, the Americas, and Asia, long before Europe knew there were other continents and other human beings beyond their states. And they even thought that the earth was flat. Went far enough, you would fall off into an abyss. In ignorance, they thought they were in India when they reached the Caribbean. And that is why he came to be known as the West Indies. Efforts of Europe in modern times, the knowledge of ancient African civilization and African contributions to science, technology, navigation, and history have been efficiently and effectively excluded from the curriculum at all segments of formal educational systems and learning in global Africa and the African diaspora. And it becomes imperative that people of African descent complete and take ownership of their own education, share the narratives that reflect our ancestry, and speak for wholesome, united future of progress. In 1964, UNESCO launched an elaborate project aimed at writing the general history of Africa. The challenge, as UNESCO saw it then, consisted of reconstructing Africa's history, freeing it from racial prejudices ensuing from slave trade and colonization, and promoting an African perspective. That task was necessary, but the most critical challenge facing global Africa is how to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery and remove the depiction of Black and Blackness as signifying backwardness and primitivism. Africa may be geographically and demographically small. As we say here, with little but with talent. Ireland and other Caribbean nations were right there in the thick of the struggle for the dismantling of apartheid as a member of the non-aligned nations. The formation and carriage of and other multilateral communities, which bonded together to ensure that the dignity of global Africa was restored and the continent finally freed of colonization and apartheid. Aware that the struggle is not yet over. Global Africa now take ownership of the narrative, knowledge and education of its youth, so that the resources and wealth of Africa can benefit global Africa. CARICOM, and other intergovernmental. Africa must bring together her descendants and build bridges through truthful and honest conversations. That mission demands the urgency of now. None of Africa survived, thrived in the Americas. The function of the innate resilience of our ancestors. The descendants of Africa over all the European powers create the first republic in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti, was not a mean achievement. Even though this victory was betrayed by the collusion of the defeated European nations to levy a charge on the victorious victim. A first in human history where the victor and victim is made to pay reparations to the defeated aggressor. After the hundreds of years of destabilizing terrorism, which the Atlantic slave trade wrought on the various communities of the Gulf of Guinea and West Central Africa, is yet to be calculated for adequate compensation by the Europeans. Lost several entire generations of its sons and daughters, thereby stultifying the growth and development of the continental homeland. Research and learning so that global Africa can with one voice proclaim never again and justify our claim. Patterson Institute of Africa Caribbean Advocacy was established by a decision of the University of the West Indies Council as part of its global outreach in its recognition of the importance of intellectual ownership of documentation and dissemination. This colloquium fits snugly within the objectives of the institute. The aim to assist in developing framework coordination of public advocacy and development partnering between the Caribbean and Africa. Provide a framework which enables leaders and academics from Africa, the Caribbean, and the diaspora to engage in a strategy to provide public advocacy around major issues affecting both regions. Promote, encourage, facilitate a fertile exchange of cultural groups, artists, scholars, entertainers, athletes, sports persons to build the ties between Africa, the Caribbean, and our diaspora. Quest for reparative justice, the fight against racism and discrimination, so as to achieve economic and social empowerment of people of color everywhere. Governments and institutions of Africa and the Caribbean in the design and establishment of a new world order, so as to promote the interests and security of developing countries in global governance, economic growth, trade, technology, health, culture, and climate change. Advocacy must flow from the rich fountain of knowledge, and so our institute regards the exchange of academic wisdom as essential to its work. The program is fully supported by our institute because it speaks to the utilization of knowledge to cement the bonds of family between continental Africa and diaspora Africa. The purpose of this program is bringing together scholars, researchers, and policymakers to deliberate and engage global African studies in an intercross and multidisciplinary manner. The outcome will bring in one coherent framework historical, cultural, economic, scientific, and religious networks of the African continent. Explore the expansion of trade between Africa and Europe, North and South America, Middle East, and Asia. Speak to the modern African diaspora generated by the forced and unforced migration of African slaves and migrants, now facing changing processes of globalization. Aim to span the different religions of Africa and those within the African diaspora. Disciplinary, cross and multidisciplinary studies cover the world and therefore deserve to be known as global African studies. That will include the studies of migrants from Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America, especially Western Europe, within Latin America, and to the USA and Canada. It must become our historical rather than historical, because they must encompass contemporary immigration and reparation challenges facing global Africa. Well, much of the early research and studies on Africa was done by Europeans, created westernized frameworks for the understanding of the continent's historic, religious, social, intellectual, scientific, aesthetic, and cultural issues and challenges. Since then, there have been several initiatives by Africans and persons of African descent globally to relate our own stories and narratives. Of African studies were launched when most African countries were becoming independent as an attempt to recover lost ground. The areas of study subsequently broadening to philosophical, social, political, religious, economic, cultural, and aesthetic issues. American countries have largely remained behind these developments, with the possible exceptions of Brazil and Cuba. Attempts to institutionalize these issues within universities and research institutions have been stunted for lack of adequate resources. Compelling need to create viable and sustainable platforms for academics, policymakers, administrators, and African descendants generally in Latin America and the Caribbean. Discuss and plan structured institutional approaches to establishing, increasing, and enhancing rigorous multi- and interdisciplinary global African studies programs in all these regions. In the coming days, I'm sure participants will have intellectually stimulating and productive interactions on various aspects of global African studies in Latin America and the Caribbean. I fervently believe that the beneficial effects of the colloquium will continue to inspire creative policy perspectives that will enrich the linkages between Africa and her diaspora as one large, united, and cohesive family. This opportunity. Congratulate the organizers of this important colloquium for a job well done under strenuous circumstances. Thank the participants from all continents of the world for taking part in our discussions. It's a great pleasure to participate in the opening of this formidable gathering of learned and distinguished professors and scholars. Fruitful deliberations. One love.
Thank you very much, the most honorable statesman in residence, Percival James Patterson, one of the icons of the Caribbean, the diaspora, and Jamaica cultural history. He has been there for such a long time, and he has made a difference. And for finding time to be with us, we thank you. Thank you very much. I will now share the greetings by Excellency, the Nigerian High Commissioner to Jamaica, Dr. Maureen Tamuno, who had to make the recording for us in spite of her very busy schedule. She is currently in Nigeria, actually, but she insisted that she would participate, which is a show of how much she valued what we are trying to do and gives her support. The Nigerian High Commission would have supported us even more if the colloquium had been in person. But the fact that it is virtual does not dilute the support that we have received from the High Commission. For this, I want to thank Her Excellency, Dr. Mrs. Tamuno.
Thank you very much. I wish to congratulate the organizers of this program, and thank you for inviting me. I bring you warm greetings from the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and would like to say a few words concerning the topic, Global African Studies in Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. It is pertinent to note that despite their shared history of colonization, slavery, and underdevelopment, countries of the Global South lack significant cooperation. In the light of the above, I would like to highlight the need for increased and renewed effort that takes due cognizance of not only the economic and political considerations, also sociological, historical, and geographical perspectives of the three regions. Also, there is a need for enhanced cooperation underpinned by poverty reduction strategies, social welfare programs, and technological progress between the regions at bilateral and multilateral levels. In the light of the above, South-South cooperation should be encouraged to diversify commercial and trade relations, as well as reduce overdependence on countries of the North. Likewise, given the fact that the Global South has similar development challenges, there is need for strengthened partnership, for knowledge exchange, and sharing of best practices. In conclusion, I would like to highlight the need for heightened collaboration and building of coalitions at multilateral levels, such as the United Nations, in order to influence global discourse in a manner that will assist achieve the common objective. Is committed to collaboration with the countries of the South.
You lost me that came from the.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Maureen Tamuno. We really appreciate you. Thank you. The program we're going to end the segment dealing with the opening session. We're a few minutes behind. I'm trying to see if I can share the program so that our colleagues can see exactly where we are. The next item on our program is can you see? Next item on the program is vote of thanks by Madam Arneola Bello. Madam Bello.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, madam. We can
hear
hear
you.
African strategic.
Please go on.
Policy host of this conference. Special thanks to Professor Bewaji, who is coordinating this, and high regards for retired Major General Shola Williams, who has been the person behind this in the last 3 years. I thank everybody for taking their time to be part of this conference, and I am hoping that within the next 3 days, as we're having this, we're going to make good use of our time, and we're going to leave this conference with wonderful lessons and messages from all over the world. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to the next sessions.
Thank you very much, Madam Bello. We will now move on to the scientific session of the first day. And the chair for this particular session is Professor Tennyson. The presenters are, I'm trying to read the name. Professor Tennyson, who is the chair, will present on issues in knowledge curation, retrieval, etc. Dr. Mosweu will be presenting on assessing inclusiveness of contemporary archiving. And Dr. Anselm Guezo will be presenting on Francophone African universities, while our own Dr. Baiana, our learned friend from Brazil, will be presenting on overcoming legal challenges in the 6th region trade. Is Dr. Tennyson, Professor Tennyson in the house? Professor Tennyson, I'm trying to see if he's linked in. I cannot see Professor Tennyson.
I'm not sure he's here, Prof.
Huh?
I'm not sure he's here, Prof. So I think we should just ask whoever is on that. Avogado is here. Who else is on that program for today that is here? And then we just take it in that order so that we don't.
Okay. I think I could only, I don't see Dr. Guezo from the Republic of Benin, I think. I don't see him here also. So the only member of that group that I see is our learned friend, Dr. Eduardo Lorenzo Viana. So what do we do? Okay. Can we have the presentation by Dr. Vaiana then? I will just serve as moderator.
I think it's good that way.
Yes, for me
Thank
it's
you.
good too. For me it's good too.
Yes, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Can you hear?
Yes,
Oh,
I can hear you very well. I believe others are also able to hear you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, my brother, and always very welcome. It's always a pleasure to address you, to talk with you, Professor Ayotunde. First, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to greet you all. I would like to greet our attendees for finding time to join us. I also salute our colleagues finalists. Especially, I would like to greet and thank the so beautiful words that came from His Excellency P.J. Patterson, His Excellency Prime Minister Emeritus of Jamaica, and also the so important words that we have listened from Her Excellency Dr. Maureen Tamuno, the Nigerian High Commissioner to Jamaica. I would like to greet all our attendees for finding time to join us, and also salute our colleagues finalists, the ones that already presented their lectures before me, the ones that are going to present their lectures today, and the ones that will present so important subjects also in the next 2 days. But especially, I would like to greet and thank you, Professor John Ayotunde, and also you, General Aishola Williams. The willpower that both ones have is an example to be followed for us. You are mentors, you, General Aishola Williams, and you, Professor Ayotunde, you are mentors for me, and I believe that you are mentors for many of us. You are examples for us. Thank you so much. It's also very important to thank all the Pan-Abstract staff, the Academy of African Indigenous Religions, Theology and Arts staff, the Patterson's Institute for African Caribbean Advocacy staff, and greeting the aforementioned institute, I also greet and salute the entire team of the University of West Indies. At last but not least, I thank and pray to our elders and to our ancestors. My name is Eduardo Lourenço Viana. I am a Brazilian lawyer and teacher. I'm a member of several national and international institutions, among which I highlight Pan-Abstract International and IDA in Uganda, and the Unified Black Movement in Brazil. The acronym of Unified Black Movement in Portuguese is MNU, Movimento Negro Unificado in Portuguese. It's a great honor and a singular privilege for me to be here today and have the opportunity to share my thoughts and surveys with regard to the theme, overcoming legal challenges in 60th region trade. And that is what I'm going to do now. I divided my presentation into three main moments. The first one, is a quick explanation of what the AFCFTA is. In the second moment, I'm going to share a quick explanation on the importance of promoting trade between the different countries that make up the diaspora, as well as those countries within the Africa continent, our motherland. And finally, in the third party, I will highlight the challenges to be overcome in order to consolidate the diaspora and the African continent as strong stakeholders within international market for goods and services, especially the regulatory and the legal challenges in this regard. So here we go. What the AFCFTA is? When we visited the official website of the AFCFTA, we can find the following definition. The AFCFTA is one of the flagship projects of Agenda 2063. The Africa we want. It's a high ambition trade agreement with a comprehensive scope that includes critical areas of Africa economy, such as digital trade and investment protection, among other areas. By eliminating barriers to trade in Africa, the object of the AFCFTA is to significantly boost intra-Africa trade, particularly trade in value-added production and the trade across all sectors of Africa's economy. This definition you can find on the AFCFTA website. Well, the creation of a free trade international area is always a challenging situation. One important matter that must be correctly addressed is the regulatory and the legal issues. The creation of the AFCFTA in 2018, the official creation, because you know this process is a process that have been taking a long time and it's a complex process, but the official introduction, the official inauguration was in 2018 in Kigali, Rwanda. And it aims to deepen the economic integration of Africa, as well as generating and distributing wealth for Africans. This trade area has more than 50 countries, 1.4 billion of people, bringing together more than $3.4 trillion in gross domestic product. That is very important. In order to reach its full potential, the AFCFTA needs to pay attention to issues such as reforms to the domestic legislation of the signatory countries, especially with regard to taxes and other custom tariffs. We need to pay attention also in health safety standards to the products that are going to be sold. And we need to pay attention to the ratification of legal instruments with protocols on trade, on services and goods, and the settlement of international disputes, just to quote some important legal matters. My research has used the World Trade Organization, WTO, the Mercosur, and the European Union as examples in order to understand how overcoming legal challenges in 60th region can help the AFCFTA to achieve its full potential. The research has shown that the three main points deserve most attention. The custom duties, and the taxes, the intellectual property rights, invest and competition policy, and the three I would like to quote is legal aspects of e-commerce. If we are here today participating in an international event, it is because we are using computers, we are using tablets, we are using cell phones. These equipments uses electricity and needs a good internet connection to function properly. In the same way, we are using clothes, shoes, pens, notebooks, water bottles. We are using all of these. We need good provisions of services with the supply of quality water, public transport at an affordable price, We need urban cleaning services that allow us to live in a healthy way in our cities. So the production and circulation of goods and services is a reality in the contemporary world. But who provides these products and services? Hello, who enjoyed the wealth generated by this production and circulation? When we purchase products and services, do we give priority to the ones provided by Africans and African descendants? Yes, we are the Black power, but we need to show the world how powerful Black money is. Again, how powerful Black money is. For instance, Brazil is a country with more than 200 million inhabitants, of which more than 100 million people are of African descent. The other countries of South America together have more than 100 million African descendants, not to mention the population of the Central America and the North America. Have you ever imagined the strength that this large population has? It is necessary to identify and encourage Black people from diaspora who are producing products and providing services. It is necessary to encourage and foster these people and the companies they manage. It is necessary to ensure that their products and services can circulate more easily, not only within their respective countries, but also abroad. Our identity roots connect us with our motherland. We often think that we are separated by oceans, but this is wrong. We are connected by water. Water unites us. A few days ago, I attended a meeting with the Barbadian High Commissioner of CARICOM in the African Union, His Excellency Alexander MacDonald. He shared the reflection above with us, and I take the opportunity to share his quote with you. We are all united by water. We cannot allow geographic barriers or long distances to keep us apart and prevent us from enjoying the strength we share. Our history, our culture, our dance, our ways of living must unite us around a common ideal, which is the full celebration of our Africanness. But for that, we need to create a platform that registers the products and services offered by Black entrepreneurs, these people who have been generating jobs and income in their respective countries for many years. They can be an excellent driving force for the development of the Africa continent. These people can act as true AFCFTA investors. I firmly believe that the existing connection between the diaspora and the African continent makes us not only have a common past, but also makes us share our present and our future. That is why we need to be more strategic. We need making our goodwill translate into concrete and measurable actions. Actions that identify the potentials that each one of us has in our respective countries and that nature have offered to our respective countries. We need to modify our competition policy, seeking new markets for products and services that our countries can more easily offer. But at the same time, we need to be open to receive products and services that foreign countries can also offer us more easily. We need to identify products and services our respective countries can offer at the most affordable prices. Our partner countries needed to reduce the taxes and the custom barriers to import these products, but this process needed to respect the reciprocity. At the same time, our countries needed to be more open to the arrival of products and services from partner nations. This process of facilitating the circulation of goods and services generate employment, income, and wealth in places where it occurs. Well, the increase in the circulation of goods and services will often also generate questions about intellectual property. That is, the need to respect and value what has been created by others. Clear and objective rules on patents need to be implemented among partner countries. Legal guarantees that your patents will be respected encourage the creation of new products and services. This is an important issue that we need to pay attention to. People often think of environmental preservation as a hindrance and obstacle to economic development. My research has shown that this way of thinking is a serious mistake. Any economic development that disrespects the environment is doomed to failure. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the meals, the food we eat, all of this is offered by nature. Any economic development that disrespects nature is a passing development. That is an economic development that is not sustainable in time and in space because it works inadequately with scarce resources. We need to pay attention to these scarce resources. Thus, disrespecting the environment is not only an environmental crime, but also a serious economic mistake. Therefore, we also need to be strategic in our investment policies. We need to invest in products and services offered by people that are African and people that are African descent, people that are African and people that are African descent, Africans, and who produce and provide services in an ecological, sustainable way. We need to find these people and invest in these people. We need to change our investment policy. And to do all this, we need to dialogue more. We need to talk more. We need literally to speak the same language. Hence, the importance of our countries promoting the teaching of English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Swahili, etc., just to name a few languages. Every penny spent, every single dollar, every single cent spent on teaching and research should be seen as an investment. The Mercosur and the CARICOM region, as example, for instance, can mutually assist each other in matters such as tourism. We can exchange experience in our research areas. We can even develop joint research and file patents jointly. We can learn from each other how best to preserve our natural environment, so abundant in both regions. Not even the sky is the limit, as our partnerships can be developed toward satellites and space research as example. In addition, it is necessary to create regulatory frameworks through legal norms that allow us to clearly understand how internet commerce will occur and develop. These international trade treaties can help cover the issues already mentioned, such as tax policy, intellectual property, and competition policies. It is already expected that within an international market as active as the one we want to implement, there will be disputes that will need to be resolved legally. To this end, I would like to suggest the creation of one of arbitration chambers composed by by lawyers from the various parties, from the various partner countries. These legal arbitration chambers could analyze possible disputes between countries with greater speed and technical specificity than the common courts of our countries. It is very likely that everything I am saying here is not new for any one of you. It's not new for any of you. But what I want to highlight now, and this requires a lot of your attention, is that we need to do all of this without repeating the same mistakes that Mercosur, the World Trade Organization, and the European Union made. With all due respect to contrary understandings, but these institutions have been promoting international trade in their operating regions, favoring the accumulation of wealth, but forgetting people and nature. The epistemological basis on which they do this causes the enrichment of a few people to the detriment of the many, the enrichment of a few to the detriment of the many, not to mention environmental degradation and the direct or indirect extermination of original people, of indigenous people, for instance. In conclusion, I would like to highlight that if, on the one hand, the existence of the World Trade Organization, Mercosur, and European Union can be used as examples, on the other hand, the mistakes made by them and by other free trade areas and other international trade institutions must be avoided. We, as Africans and African descendants, we cannot simply copy the global trade patterns, which have been destroying nature and placing us as subordinates of societies where we live. We need to honor our roots. We need to encourage and value Black entrepreneurship. We need to prioritize the acquisition of goods and the provision of services that have African and African descended people as managers. We need to encourage the production of goods and the provision of services that respect the environment where we live, the environment that our elders and our ancestors told us that we are also a part of. It's important to remember that the same vital force, and Professor Sheikh Tian taught me it, teached me it some months before. We need to understand that the same vital force that vibrating us, vibrating all living beings in the lands, in the waters, in the forest, in the air. Disrespecting this is disrespecting our essence, is repeating the same mistakes made by the colonizers and by their children. If we are looking for an actually sustainable socio-economic development, we will be able to make the AFCFTA become the free trade area that will change the lives of Africans for the better and make the world a better place for living. We need to look for an actually sustainable socio-economic development. We, as Africans, we need to think differently. We need to do differently. We need to look to the future without forgetting where we come from. We need to be strategic. We need to analyze in each situation what is most suitable for us and for others, since in fact, we are all one and we cannot leave anyone behind. So, my brothers and sisters, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your attention and your time. Ashanti Sana, brothers and sisters, Ubuntu.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. You ended on a note which I consider very, very important. The religions of the Arabian Desert tell us that salvation is an individualistic thing. But African traditions believe in community. A situation where you alone go to your own heaven as an atom is anathema to Africa. So when you closed your presentation by indicating that nobody should be left behind, that is the true African way of looking at life. And the dementia, whatever it is that happened in the Arabian Desert that created a kind of atomism where you go to your heaven alone, that needs to be interrogated. And it is part of what this whole process of global African studies is. Thank you very much for the presentation. I've been trying to see if any of the other presenters are in the house who would want to make a presentation, but I see Dr. Musweu, but she says she will not be presenting now. I believe she's been preoccupied with so many things at her university. So I think that gives us, we would have saved some time. So we will then move on to questions, to discussion of our learned friend, Dr. Eduardo Lorenzo Viana's paper. So if you wish to ask any question, just go to reactions and raise your hand and you'll be acknowledged. You'll be given, the mic will be open for you so that you can ask your question so that Dr. Viana can respond. Any comments or questions? Well, I think probably, I don't see any hand up. Let me ask our presenter, Dr. Viana. Recently, it was discovered, I think, somewhere in the Congo, where some metallic object, something looking like a rock, actually become very, very electrical, sparking and all that when it is touched with something. Also in recent times, South Africa has been going through what is known as load shedding. And many of our countries also face all kinds of challenges. In your presentation, you mentioned the fact that African resources need to be utilized to develop Africa. However, the configuration which colonialism and the international legal frameworks have been put in us is such that before African countries speak to each other, they will have to speak to their former colonial masters first. How do we get around that? How do we get into the psyche of our leadership to let them understand that the energy problem in Africa, take West Africa, for example, that the energy crisis in West Africa can be solved using the resources that are available in West Africa, which ECOWAS was supposed to have addressed. How do we get around that? And then we'll go on to General Shola Williams, whose hand is up.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Professor Ayotunde. And you are sharing a very good question. That's a very good question. His Excellency PJ Patterson already addressed a bit about this subject on his lecture. One thing is the enslavement of bodies, but another and the most important thing is the enslavement of minds. The enslavement to be free from the enslavement of minds is a very difficult thing to do. Thanks God and thanks our ancestors and thanks our elders, our bodies are not enslaved anymore, but the way we think, the way many of us think, keep being an enslaved approach with regard how to manage our natural resources and how to make the trade we have been doing. As you quoted very well, sometimes, and a lot of times within the African continent, when the trade is, when we try to make trade, happens that in first place, we need, it's necessary to quote, it's necessary to address our former colonial masters. And this is wrong. We need to be connected and to understand that the Africa is ours. We need to understand that the countries we live is ours. And we need to find the best ways in each situation to address matters that are important for us. And we are going to understand it together. England don't care about us. French don't care about us. Spanish don't care about us. Portugal don't care about us. We need to speak, to talk with each other. Brazilian and especially African Brazilians. We need to talk with Jamaicans. We need to talk with Barbadians. We need to talk with our brothers and sisters from Trinidad and Tobago. We need to talk with our brothers and sisters from Guinea-Bissau. We need to talk with our brothers and sisters from Nigeria, Uganda, South Africa. We need to talk with our brothers and sisters from Mozambique, from Costa de l'Ivoire, from Cabo Verde. We need to talk among ourselves and find the best ways to solve our problems, the problems that we face. If the former colonizers truly want to help us, yes, they can help us. But in the first place, we need to understand what we need and how we can achieve it. The problems are local problems. So we need to understand very clearly and very carefully what are the problems, and together decide how to solve them. If the former colonizers want to help us, okay, we are going to listen to them and see what they are telling, but we need to be carefully because the colonizer ignorance keep existing. And many times when they come and offer help, what the true behind the help support they are offering is another type of colonization, a modern type of colonization. Such to quote an example, Chinese are investing in Africa, but in the same way, they are copying and they are reproducing the African products in China. In a future, maybe they will not need the African products anymore. That's one thing that I am very aware and I am very worried about, because I know that we need to support and to make the development of our continent, of our motherland, and know we need to find ways to make this development happens, and we need to be aware that the colonizers many times are not wanting to help. They are trying to make a new type of colonization, a modern colonization. So it's important we support the AFCFTA. We need to improve our abilities to talk with each other inside the African continent, but outside the African continent with other brothers and sisters that are also Africans. The diaspora born in Africa, the diaspora born outside of Africa, but the diaspora that actually believes in our Africanness. We need to talk to each other. We can't permit that the difficulties of geographic distance and the language distance put us apart to achieve the dream of our ancestors, that is to see an African continent united, like Kwame Nkrumah has made in the past. Thank you so much for your question, sir. I hope that my response covered all the points you quoted.
Yes, thank you so much.
You are most welcome. You are so
General
welcome.
Williams would like to
let me see. It's unfortunate that we talk too much and we act little. Two basic challenges we face. One is technology. Two is economy. Okay. And that economy surrounds money. If Africans, whether they are in the diaspora or anywhere, do not find a way. In fact, Africa is one of the only, Africans are the only people, apart from the Jews who have even dropped it, who use the word diaspora. Other Asians don't talk about Indian diaspora or anything like that, except if journalists are writing. They just call them overseas Indians. Africans don't want that. And that is why you have African Americans, Afro-Brazilians, and things like that. So we don't even have a common name for each other. Two, coming to economy. I've never heard of any conference or see a group of economists of African descent coming together and saying that this economy is not what this present economic system of the world, this present monetary system of the world, this present financial system of the world is not working for us. How can we disrupt that system so that we can have the benefit? I've never had that. And even if we want to call a meeting of that, we have to beg a donor who will pay for everybody to come for that meeting. They've never come on their own. Even the ones that are rich enough to come on their own, they want somebody to pay. It does not happen like that in Asia. It does not. We talk too much. The Asians have gone far ahead of us, making headway. And forgetting about colonization, all these jargons and things like that we use. Coming to technology, many years ago, we organized a conference in Trinidad and Tobago to bring African scientists and everybody together. The late Prime Minister Manning of Trinidad and Tobago was very happy that we could organize something like that. And he said it should be repeated every 2 years. Unfortunately, he died. Okay, what was it to talk about? What are the technologies that Africans all over the world are inventing, producing, reverse engineering, and so on? What are they doing that are of benefit to Africa, that we don't need to be dependent on any other person, except when we work together with them and want to improve on it? That's what the Asians are doing. Are we doing the same thing? African scientists don't even meet in Africa, not to talk about those ones who are coming from abroad. For them to meet, somebody has to pay. Even when they have money for themselves to pay, they'll never pay. You cannot organize ourselves together without somebody paying the bill. That is the challenge. And we cannot organize ourselves. How many universities have joint programs with African universities on the area of technology? How many? These are issues that need practical action. Not all the talk. We continue to talk everywhere. And every time we prepare a program, it's like a Bricktown agenda that the Prime Minister of Barbados has prepared. That Bricktown agenda completely leaves South Africa, concentrates on the Caribbean, which is people with mostly African descendant, but again, looking for money from the donor countries. And so let me end up by saying that we need to find a cure for 3 AIDS. 1, acute integrity deficiency syndrome, corruption, fraud, and everything, increasing crime in African and diaspora countries where there are people of African descent. Second one, acute intellectual donor dependency syndrome, like the word diaspora. Okay, everything we try to copy, we really adapt, and we continue to show colonization. Okay, and thirdly, which to me has spoiled Africans, completely spoiled them. And what do they say? Acute international donor dependency syndrome. When you work with other people and you tell them, we are going to hold a conference at the end of the year, they will start saving money, no matter how poor they are, until November. Africans will say, oh, we haven't got the money. What do they want to do? The money they have, they buy expensive dresses, expensive shoes, and so on. And they say at the end of the day, they have no money. How do you want to make progress? Let us stop talking and start making action. So all those issues that they are talking about, the same problems we have in Africa with respect to trade, it's the same problem they have in the Caribbean. It's the same problem they have in CARICOM. Now there's a big organization called ECLAC. We bring Latin American countries and Caribbean countries. They have never been able to work any of that great things within themselves. And in all those countries, we have people of African descent. And there are some people that have come across, like for example, in Ecuador, somebody embraced me and said, I have never touched an African from the continent before. What are we doing to create a platform like that? No, let's stop talking and look for action and let people be able to sacrifice for this action to take place. That's all I can say for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, General Aishola Williams. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate your words. You are correct, sir. It is not easy to overcome the problems we face. It's not easy. We need to pay attention to technology, and we need to pay attention to our economy. We have problems in our motherland with regard crimes. That is true. That's true. And the corruption is an example. So one important thing is to find the good leaders in each single country, and they exist because who was born learning what Ubuntu actually is can be a very good leader. If someone practices corruption, it is not following the Ubuntu philosophy and the Ubuntu-centric philosophy. It is not following that. So we need to find that ones, that brothers and sisters that are actually Africans in the essence of the word, in the actually meaning of the word. The people who can drive to this development that we are dreaming. But you were correct. We need to stop to talk so much, and we need to get started to action, to work together. One important thing is get started with small projects like this one. This is a small project that can translate into actions. If our universities foster the communication process, learning English, but also learning Portuguese and learning Spanish, it will help a lot. We have many people here in Brazil that can help us, but they speak only Portuguese. This is a difficult to be overcome. We can and we need to get started with small projects, and these projects can come larger and larger. We need to get started with small things, and starting with more things, we can achieve great things. That's what I think about it. Thank you again. Thank you so much for your words. You were I absolutely agree with you. We need to stop to talking and get started to action, to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kampor. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Professor Kampor has his hands up. Can you give us your question, your intervention?
Thank you so much, Professor Tunde. It's Dr. Kampwe Wada from the University of Yaoundé 1, Cameroon, Central Africa, not too far from Nigeria. So first of all, I wish to thank Dr. Eduardo Viana from Brazil for his wonderful presentation. And I have a little concern because in his presentation, he mentioned the fact that we are not really separated, but rather all united by water. So I really want to find out how come. So what's that power that water has in order to unite Africans and African diaspora? Merci beaucoup.
First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Kampwer. Please repeat, which country are you from? Please repeat.
I'm from Cameroon, Central Africa. It's not far
very
from
good.
Nigeria.
Cameroon, yes,
Cameroon,
yes.
Yeah.
I have friends in Cameroon. I'm so sorry because I have not listened at the name of the country, Cameroon. Yes. This quotation about water that I have been sharing with you, it is not a sentence that I myself built. Some days ago, I listened to the Barbadian High Commissioner from CARICOM to Kenya. His Excellency Alexander MacDonald today is in Kenya, but he is from Barbados. And he quoted this: the water unites us. Sometimes, many times, we address the matter of geographic distance, the geographic separation, as a difficulty. But water is a way that can connect us. We can use the oceans to make a cheaper and faster trade, as example. And we are all connected by water, but we need to preserve this water. We need to pay attention to it. The water is important, the air is important, the lands are important. We need to pay attention to it and to use it as a resource that can foster, can support our development. When I use the word water, it's a metaphorical sense, because every single continent is in contact with water. And so we are all connected. We are connected by our roots. We are connected by our blood, and we are connected by water. The same vital energy that is outside us is also inside us. Our body has water. Water is life. So we need to use a way, one of the ways that we can foster our development is use the oceans to make the trades we need to do, to buy products and services and to sell products and services. Is in that way the water connects us in every single continent, despite the distance that we need to face. I'm not quite sure if I covered your question, but that's what
I might add that in the presentation by the most honorable statesman in residence, he had mentioned the fact that the oceans, the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, had been traversed, they had been covered, they had been traveled by Africans. And when somebody looks at the Aztec country, the Olmec country, then you begin to see that Ivan van Satima was right. Because Africans had traded with the Americas. You know, the pyramids that you find in the Americas were exact replicas of what you find all over Africa. Many people talk about the Nile Valley as if that is the only place where you find pyramids. So the symbolism and the metaphor of water is very significant. It is what links all of us. And it will still continue to link all of us because that creates the best way of transporting. Air freight is very limited, but the water freight is unlimited. That is what the trawlers, you know, the big container ships and all those things travel. And until Africa begins to take very seriously that. And you see, many of our magnates who were into shipping in Africa. Many Nigerians were into shipping. They had many ships in those days. Many of them were destroyed. That was before the Asians and the other shipping lines took over. So what General Williams is saying is that we need to get very serious and take seriously the responsibility we have for each other. We cannot outsource trade to other people and be getting goods and services through third parties and expect them to be cheap. The rentier system that the West has built is one that is determined to continue to strangulate anybody who wants to enter into even middle income or anything, unless you are ready to sacrifice and stop buying those expensive shoes and, you know, things that General Williams lamented so much about, which keeps exporting the resources from our continent and from our pockets in the diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your support.
Any other? Yes, any other? I'm trying to see if there is any other person who would.
Yes, we have Abba Anwar, but also we have in the chat one very important comment from Urichi Campbell, I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing his or her name accordingly, but I want to read his quotation on the chat. He wrote right there. One can support the point of Dr. Viana by looking at how Brazil expanded from the coastal into Amazon basin by using the river and its tributaries. In the 18th century, traders and the Jesuit priests traveled by these ways and established themselves up to the boundaries of Peru. Upstreaming this issue of traffic is most important. The BRICS cooperation needs more attention and realization on the ground. Thank you so much for your quotation, Dr. Ulrich Campbell. That is so true. Amazonia and the Amazon River is a so large region, and the integration of that region is made by water. And also we need to remember that Brazil has a very large coast. So the Atlantic coast is an important way, as Professor Ayonde Tunde already quoted. It's a good way to make the transportation of goods and services in the containers. So that is so true, and thank you so much for your questions. I can see Professor Sheikh Tian,
let's in this order. If there is time, we might take all of them, but let us have Professor Abba Anwar and then Professor Sheikh Tian. Please make it brief. We have gained some ground because some of the presenters are not here, but we want to, ventilate the discussion better. Professor Anwar?
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Prof, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a word or two. And I have to comment the paper presented by Dr. Eduardo, and I just want to talk on only one issue he raised. He suggested for the establishment of a legal arbitration platform among parties that are involved in this crusade, if you like, all in an effort to strengthen free trade on the continent. So I just want to know how can that, what can we begin with to kickstart the process, especially looking at how the relationship will look like between this proposed arbitration platform with other institutions on the continent, like African Union and other regional bodies like ECOWAS. And I do suggest also that, how do also we, what do we do to assist or to encourage our leaders to key in to this all important effort? And lastly, I want to suggest that in case we have this legal arbitration platform established, any relationship with any institution or body outside the shores of the continent of Africa shouldn't be made to be subservient and all that. So thank you very much for the time given to me. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Dr. Professor Abba Anwar. This is a very good question, and this is a very important subject. This is a very important issue. When we talk about arbitration chambers, we need to think that some countries can get in and others do not want to get in. We need to understand that some economic groups and some traders will agree in get in and other ones no. So when we think about arbitration chambers, we need to do it in a regional level. The creation of these chambers need to get started with countries that are already close to each other, that are already next to each other, and lawyers, jurists, and specialists in trade markets need to talk with each other and do this creation. After that, after we AFCFTA and the regional, the RECs that already exist within Africa continent, after they made the correct arrangements in their norms, in their regulatory norms, they needed to say, yes, the creation of that one arbitration chamber will answer for problems, for issues, for disputes that can come from some type of trade. And it's very important that lawyers already has experience in working with trade and work with legal subjects connected with trade, and they need to be very honest, because one time that decision about some dispute has been activated, it will not be submitted to a common court. So it's not easy to get started. That's true. It's not easy to get started, because it's important also that the AFCFTA establish the correct legal standards, legal norms, legal international norms that are going to deal with the international market that is going to happen within the continent. And what is true to AFCFTA is also true to CARICOM and the Mercosur and Brazil and Argentina. It is possible that we create also here in our region these arbitration chambers, but we need to find people that can do it in a very honest, in a very careful way, both in the technical sense, but also in the confidence that we can put on them, because their services are going to be very important. I already quoted before, one important thing that we need to make is that we need to do is to overcome the language issue is an important issue, because we don't have many people, other countries use English and other language as their mother language. But Brazil, as example, for instance, in general, we use only Portuguese as language useful in our every single day basis of work. So we needed to overcome this difficulty. So it's something that we needed to solve here inside. We needed to be more open to learn Spanish, to learn English, to learn Swahili. We need to do this, and this is a homework that every single country needed to do. But yes, we have people that can support this type of action. And how to assist our leaders? Yes, we needed to put our leaders to talk each other. Well, President Lula is much more open to, I believe that you have been seeing in the journals, in the newspapers, that Lula traveled to United States and invited President Biden to come to Brazil. Lula is going to Europe. Lula is going to Africa. Lula is much more open to talk to the world. And I truly believe we have here in Brazil Minister Silvio Almeida, that is African descendant minister. He is the Minister of Human Rights. We have our Minister of Racial Equality, Aniele Franco, that is also African descendant, she is also African, like I am too. So I believe that we need it first, in the first place, is to put our leaders to talk with each other. This is an important thing to do. And we need to find the leaders that are actually follow our Ubuntu-ness. Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you.
We take Professor Tiam?
Prof, if we don't have time, it's okay. I can reach out to my brother Eduardo later. It was just a quick comment.
Okay, make it very quick.
Yes.
Make it quick. And
I was just going to say, my brother, two things that you said that I found extremely interesting. The first one is the question of water. I think water as something that stops people from connecting is a very European and Eurocentric understanding of space. But for us, water is precisely a route, a passage, something that connects us. So in this sense, I just wanted to participate with you and also calls for the necessity of endogenous African ontologies and methods of thinking of the world. Because if we do that, then it will allow us to engage completely differently with who we are as people. What connects human beings is not necessarily the space where they live, but it's a certain understanding of kinship, rooted in what one can say is a different engagement with reality. In this particular space, right? If we start thinking of time differently, not anymore in terms of rootedness and movements, therefore separated from a certain rootedness, but time in a more elastic ways, then even the idea of diaspora, the difference between the idea of diaspora and the idea of continental Africa also changes, and therefore we engage differently. Hence, the importance of names. The idea of diaspora itself is always rooted of a place that's fixed and others who departed from it. That also, all of that, if you follow me, all I'm saying is the entire ways that we are even conceptualizing the relationship between all of us and people of African descent is rooted in Western modern understanding of being, becoming, and community. As long as we keep doing that, then we'll keep using wrong words. And when we use wrong words, we conceptualize reality and create reality differently. So yes, I agree definitely with you and call for endogenous ways of thinking and in general.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful.
I also thank you very much, Professor Sheikh Tiam. My apologize if sometimes I use the wrong words. This is a challenging situation for me because on one hand, I'm trying to use accordingly the Utocentric philosophy that I learned from you. I learned from you. I learned, no, I'm always learning. I'm always in process of learning the Utocentric philosophy because it's a very large philosophy and it is not easy to learn it all in only one time. But on the other hand, we need to understand, you are correct. The words we use build the word that, build the way we understand the word. If we use some type of word, this will build the way we understand the word. But on the other hand, the people need to understand what we are talking about. So we need to find a way to build the bridge from where we are and where we want to achieve. Because I am African, but I am also Brazilian. And that happens also with the North American in the United States. This also happens with our brothers from Argentina that Professor Ayotunde very correctly quoted some moments ago. We have so few African descendants in Argentina because they were killed. I have a friend that is from Argentina, and many times she tells me that they think they are from other countries. They don't believe she is African. She's also an African, and they are friends. Don't believe that she was born in Argentina, but she actually born right there. So it is something that we need to pay attention, where we are and where we want to achieve. To find the correct words, it's not easy because I am an African born in Brazil. I love the country where I was born in, but I also love my motherland. how to connect to these two things. This is our difficulty, but thank you for helping me to find the epistemological basis where we can build it. Thank you so much, Professor Sheikh-Chian.
General Williams, very briefly. Well, I think General Williams is not there. Ulrich, can you please make it very brief so that we go to the next scientific session? Please, very brief.
Yes, okay, thank you. This point about water and the rivers, if I've repeatedly looked at how Northern, Central and Northern Europe began to make the transition from tribal societies, which was still about 1,400 years ago, we were still tribal societies, very much at war and very much fragmented, how we made it to the structured and institutionalized world that we have in Europe now, in spite of all the catastrophes and so on. And two things emerged from my mind. The one is indeed the pathways in the imaginary. The element of water has been mentioned, and I hope I grasp the significance of it. There is an excellent book on Afro-Brazilian relations. I forgot the author, but it is O Rio Chamado Atlântico. O Rio Chamado Atlântico, a river called Atlantic. And this refers to the living trade between free Africans, first from Angola and the Congo, and then from West Africa, the Nigerian coast, to Brazil, to the Caribbean, but especially to Brazil. And these free Africans, some of them even slave traders, were essential for the preservation and the establishment of Afro-Brazilian religion, Afro-Brazilian cultural association, even political associations, even buying the freedom of people, entrepreneurship, traffic to and fro, there and back again, in both ways. And these things have to be brought to memory, to realization, to awareness, to the self-concept. I'm adamant about it. There is no sense in defining Afro-American identity solely and primarily through slavery. In Germany, 80% of the population were slaves. They were called serfs. They were pressed into serfdom over centuries. They were tenants first, and then they became suppressed into servitude, and that meant almost slavery. You could not marry without the permission of the owner. The owner could take your goods and fuck them up without having to ask. It was considered a traditional right, and things like that. And this freedom, the fight for freedom, was essentially began in the 17th century, even in the Reformation. The Reformation was also empowered by the rebellion of the serfs to reclaim their old freedom, and they found it religiously in Protestantism. It carried on up to the 18th century in Russia in the 19th, about the same time as slavery was abolished in the American colonies too. But there would be no sense in defining German. I'm ethnic German, born in South Africa and South African citizen too, but there would be no sense in defining my self-concept as a German through the enslavement as servitude of the majority of the population. To me, of course, it is meaningful that some of my ancestry were free people even in the Middle Ages. It gives me a sense of, oh, well, we managed to escape slavery, but I know there are many others who had this too. So working on the self-concept is one thing. Then the imaginary points of pilgrimage. It is important to strengthen the BRICS cooperation because it can disrupt this network like a spider. The old colonial powers in London, Paris especially, have now, after Second World War in the United States, they sit in the center of the imaginary webs, and all the traffic goes to them and from there elsewhere. So people will fly from London to fly to another African country. I told it to a friend of mine from South Africa who brought to a conference in Juiz de Fora to tell her, look, there are flights from Angola, even South Africa to Angola to Brazil. You can fly this way, but it has not arrived in the minds yet, which means to strengthen the knowledge of language. You refer to Portuguese. Portuguese, to make it a case, is the language of 90% of the 240 million Portuguese-speaking people identify as partially African or wholly African. This makes it a language of the South. I've been to some of us have been to the founding of the Professor Bebaji too, of the Institute for African Studies at University of Zululand, with an introduction by the minister there, Minister of Education, who made a passionate speech. But this center is 400 kilometers, not even 400 kilometers south of Lourenço Marques or Maputo in Mozambique. But the traffic there is dismal. To the average South African, Mozambique is a place, could have been on the other side of the Atlantic. It is like other cultural sphere. It is Catholic, it is Portuguese speaking, it could be on the moon. It is just as far as away. And these structures of colonial empires still persist and divide the South-South cooperation. So it is adamant and important to create active exchange of students, encounters across the Atlantic, and especially Brazil being the largest country that identifies as partially African in heritage, with the ideology of races, but a significant point of African identity, which makes Brazilians Brazilian and distinguishes from the Portuguese. So this strengthening of South-South has to be done on the ground of the academic institutions that you are working in which you participate, of the networking and all this. And then trade will follow once this has arrived in the minds of the people, that there could be commerce made in Brazil too, and between South Africa and Brazil or Botswana or whatever. And there we have to work. Then we can contribute our own part in the realms of activity that we have, and then hope that the big politics and economics will follow. It's an issue of mind and imagination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. General Williams?
Yes, I'll be quick. I'll be very quick. One, it's okay. People can continue to intellectualize the challenges that we have. Okay? The problem, the challenge is not languages. One, with the new technologies, AI, ML, and so on and so forth, the question of languages will be something of the past. I can tell you that. And secondly, English is becoming the language of the world. Many countries now are telling their people, you must learn English. So it is not the challenge for Africans coming together. Number two, the case of AFSTA, Africans are trying to leapfrog without the 7 pillars of boosting inter-African trade. There are 7 pillars. African countries don't bother about that. 3, about African leaders. African leaders cannot do much without the people. Civil society organizations like us trying to find connections amongst ourselves and coming up with ideas, solutions, and things like that. And one of the areas that Pan-Africa was very keen about was setting up an institute in UWI, in Jamaica, in Lagos, in South Africa. And I went to Haiti to see whether I could set up one there. Even the one that are set up, how are they working together? How are they working together? No, let us come to the practical issues on the ground. Even within Pan-African itself, that is trying to do so many things. How many people are coming forward? How many people are coming forward? The people is not the leader. We have question of poverty psychosis. We believe we are very poor, and therefore we cannot make sacrifices to make us function like the Asians are doing, period.
Thank you very much, General Williams. I remember when I challenged, the one who should have been the vice president to MKO, had he not been robbed of his mandate, Baba Gana Kingibe. And he said to me that Rome was not built in a day. And I responded by saying that indeed, Rome was not built in a day, but people started building Rome. When are we going to start building our own Rome?
You are building it.
And I think that is the point you are making, that we all need to come together in our little ways to begin the projects of putting the blocks one on top of each other, so that in short order, our Rome can also emerge. Thank you very much. I think it's even though this was the only presentation in this scientific session, I believe all of you will agree with me that Dr. Eduardo Lorenzo Viana, our learned friend, has given us such a wonderful presentation, which has actually taken up more than the hour, you know, which is a wonderful thing. Thank you so much. I look on the program, I do not see anyone in the second scientific session, which was to have been chaired by Professor Solomon Nagash. That's the presentations by Sylvia Abu, Solomon Nagash, as well as Noel Odraogo. So I would suggest that we move on to the third panel. I see my brother there, Biko, Professor Biko Agozino is in the house. I see Professor Smart, he is also in the house. I am yet to see either Dr. Sasha K. Hines or Dr. Debbie Maman. Fortunately, all of you are, you know, my brothers and sisters. I believe we can turn over the floor to, let us give a round of applause to Dr. Viana for that wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And you know, next,
thank you, Professor. Thank you.
When next I come to Brazil, I'll try and see if I can find you so I can get some acarajé. You know what acarajé is?
Yes, from Bahia, Salvador, Bahia is a very important food. You will be very welcome, my brother.
Yes, it's a Yoruba delicacy. You know.
Oh, really? I didn't know. I didn't know. Yeah. Very good.
It's a Yoruba delicacy.
Thank you for teaching me.
Yes, it's akara. Akara is made from beans and then it is fried and then you use it to eat a corn and various other things. It works very well with gari, but don't let me take the time of Biko.
Professor, in Brazil, it is acarajé in Brazil.
Yes.
It's acarajé.
Oh, incidentally, Dr. Viana, you said something about language. Yoruba language has been recognized by the Brazilian government, I think under President Lula da Silva. I hope this would come back again. I think there was a little poll on it under Bolsonaro, but I assume that that bond will be further rekindled now. Thank you so much, Dr. Viana.
Thank you. Thank you. You are so welcome, my brother and Professor Ayotunde. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate. I also, very briefly, very quickly, I'm going to thank also Professor Ulrich and General Aishola Williams. Professor Ulrich has said something about to build our strong power, not only with regard to the enslavement, but also with regard to some good leaders that we have had in the past. And some examples of it are Zumbi dos Palmares and Dandara dos Palmares. Zumbi dos Palmares and Dandara his wife, Dandara dos Palmares. They were very important African leaders here in Brazil in the 18th century. And we have so many others leaders that were generals, that were captains, that were specialists in trade. We are so smart, we are so powerful, and we need to understand it. Those examples are important to build our Africanity and our Africanity and our Africanness. Thank you so much. That's what I needed to point out. Thank you, General Williams. Thank you, Professor Ulrich.
Yes, thank you so much. Before I turn over to Professor Agozino, I would just like to briefly acknowledge my very senior colleagues in the House. I see Professor Omofolabo Ajayi Soyinka there. Thank you so very much for being here. Professor Shola Akiniade is in the house. Thank you so much. I saw my dean, the Dean of Arts, Obafemi Awolowo University. I saw him. Where is he now? I hope that's Professor Yeniyi. Thank you so much for being with us. And I saw Professor Yemi Ademowo also there. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. Thank you. Professor Agosino, over to you.
Thank you.
I think there is only one other co-presenter on that panel, and that is Professor Smart. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Bawaji. This is a wonderful opportunity. I was with you in Trinidad and Tobago in 2007 or 2008. And I'm happy to join again from the US today. I wish I was with you there in Mona.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My presentation is on the cultural capital created by the ordinary people in the Caribbean and in Africa and throughout the African diaspora that we continue to share with each other, going and coming across what Paul Gilroy theorized as the Black Atlantic. One of the examples of the Black Atlantic sharing of cultural motifs that Gilroy highlighted in that book was reporting on James Brown's band rehearsing, and somebody remarked that their music sounded a lot like the music of Fela Kuti. And James Brown said, that's all right, because Fela Kuti got some of it from his band in the first place. And so there is that constant giving and taking by the African world from each other. But today I want to focus more on the musical lyrics written from the Caribbean to inform us that they are attentive to the struggles that we are engaged in Africa. I say so because I grew up in Africa, in Nigeria, and listening to the music of Peter Tosh, Bob Marley, and others, it sounded as if they were speaking to the African condition, or what Peter Tosh would call sufferation, that we were struggling against. And I learned to listen to those songs in translation in Igbo language that made a lot of sense to me. But as we know, a lot of people in Jamaica also identify as Igbo. They call themselves Igbo Red. And this is taken into their songs in the form of the chant, I am red, red, redder than red. They don't say red once and stop. They repeat it or iterate it, which is how the Igbo say red, because the word red is blood, blood in Igbo. It's not just blood, but blood like blood, blood, blood. And so the Jamaicans are saying red, red, redder than red. They are almost speaking in an Igbo tongue. And this has been documented in some of the words that they use in their songs and use in everyday speech in Jamaica. For example, when they say unu, which is you plural, that's exactly the same word in Igbo, unu, you plural. Or when they say aki, a food that they eat in Jamaica, it is also aki in Igbo language, or a reference to nuts. Any nuts, coconut nuts, palm nuts, whatever is aki in Igbo. Similar words. I mean, exactly the same word. And we can go on and on to look at those. But this has been disputed in some literary criticism that suggests that
the identity Igbo or Yoruba or Hausa did not exist until the Europeans created those identities. But I think the Europeans are claiming too much for themselves because the white man has a God complex. They think they created everything, including our languages. But I believe we've been speaking Igbo even before there was anybody known as a white man or European. We've been speaking Yoruba too. We've been speaking Fulani, Efik, Ibibio, Hausa. And these are all related languages. We are family. We are related to one another. Anybody who believes that we're not related should go and prove the contrary hypothesis. But there is enough evidence to indicate that we are related. And there is plenty of evidence to indicate that the Igbo, from the Bight of Biafra, we are among the people who were most frequently kidnapped and transported across the seas to be enslaved in the West Indies, in the case of Jamaica and Barbados and Haiti, and in many of the states in Southern United States of America. So the exercise I'm doing is not simply an exercise in imagination. It is an exercise in reconnection with our people who are in the diaspora, so that we continue to show concern for the struggles that we are going through both at home and in the diaspora. I do not have the time to go into a detailed analysis of the accounts of some of the enslaved Africans in their memoirs who claim to be Igbo and how they experienced enslavement. We can find out from the work of the memoir of Oloida Ekwino, which means in Igbo language, Oluada, voiceless, Ekwino, Ekwano, unheard, which was how he felt when he was enslaved and nobody heard his cries until he wrote that bestseller, showing us how cultured and how civilized our people were before the encounter with Europeans who were not as clean and not as merciful, not as kind as the Africans knew among themselves. There are other such texts, including ones written by enslaved people in Jamaica. They say that they were called Igbo Red because they had light skins, and the Igbo, the African, has had children who are light-skinned. People like King Yellowman of the dancehall fame would be completely welcome in Africa anywhere as an albino, or if you like, white man. But I am also aware that there are authors who have challenged the account of people like Oloida Ekwino to say that he wasn't born in Africa, he couldn't have written it himself, he must have been born in Virginia. Again, that is speculation on the part of the critics. There is evidence that there were lots of people who were born in Africa who were then transported to the New World, and we should listen to their accounts. So let me continue by reminding us that the identification with the Igbo in the case of Jamaica, Barbados, Haiti, and parts of the African diaspora is also a contemporary identification, not simply an identification born out of the transportation and enslavement of Africans. The war in Nigeria, the civil war between Biafra and Nigeria, must have raised the consciousness of many of the African diaspora who identify as Igbo because of the injustice that was done to the Igbo during the 30 months of the Biafra War. More than 3.1 million people were killed in 30 months, mostly by using what was called the use of starvation as a legitimate weapon of war, but also through bombardment and small arms fire supplied by the former colonizer, the United Kingdom, in alliance with the Soviet Union that supplied the war planes. A lot of the Jamaican youth who were gaining consciousness at that time identified strongly with the rebels, which was called the Igbo we are called in Nigeria during the war. And so they called themselves rebels. Bob Marley would sing again and again, "I am a rebel." One of the singers actually was named Igbo because he was skinny and people thought he looked like Biafran babies. So the red in Igbo red is not simply the skin color, because Buju Banton, who is black, would also sing red, redder than red, because the redness there is referring to the rebellion against injustice, which is something that is found as a common theme in reggae music. That is part of the reason why some of us grew up in Africa as strong reggae fans. If you look at the lyrics or listen to the lyrics of Woman No Cry by Bob Marley, it sounds as if he was speaking directly to the women, the mother and child that Achebe talked about in Girls at War, and how they continue to look after their babies, comb their hair, even though they were malnourished and at the point of dying. And Bob Marley is singing, "Mba, nwanye bezina. Mba, nwanye bezina." That is Woman No Cry. Translated into Igbo, it made a lot of sense growing up. Or Peter Tosh singing about legalize it, a prophecy that has now come true in many parts of the world, but sadly not so in Africa, the legalization of marijuana. Instead of using it as an excuse to criminalize African youth disproportionately, they are now turning around to allow recreational marijuana, even in Jamaica, where medical marijuana has been allowed, and in Trinidad and Tobago, medical marijuana is being allowed. Other African countries haven't moved in that direction. They are still using marijuana as an excuse to criminalize African youth, the same way that European countries are using the war on drugs to incarcerate disproportionate numbers of Black women, and the way that Southeast Asian countries are using those drugs offenses as the excuse to execute large numbers of African youth, when those drugs should be made legal and not be used to criminalize. So Peter Tosh sings, "Make Iwejinia, 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 Namoga Kosaya." Ụfọdụ na-akpọ ya Igbo. You see, that is what they call it in Nigeria in the Yoruba term, Igbo, which means bush. Peter didn't use Igbo in his song, but when I translate it for myself, I put in Igbo and it works. Bob Marley also sang war, which is Aya in Igbo. And when I sing it in Igbo, it kind of rhymes or flows. Aya dị na east, aya dị na west, aya dị na north, aya dị na south. Aya, mana anyị achọghị nsogbu ọbụla. We don't want any more trouble. These are some of the songs that remind me of our kinship with our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. But that brings me to the present, because there is still consciousness of the injustice that the Igbo suffered, but that has not been addressed in Nigeria by the Nigerian government. There is still agitation for the realization of the state of Biafra. There is a young man who is in prison now in Nigeria, even though the courts had acquitted him and dismissed charges against him. The Nigerian federal government refused to obey the order of the courts to release Nnamdi Kanu from prison, simply because he's calling for a referendum on the state of Biafra. A referendum is demanded all over the world. It's not a crime. Why would Nigeria continue to keep that young man in prison in poor health conditions just because he's demanding for a referendum, which the government, the Nigerian government, can actually win by campaigning, by providing investments and citing industries in the Southeast that they have not done since the Biafra War, rather than try to intimidate anybody who's flying the Biafra flag, a beautiful flag based on the international Black national flag of black, red, and green. If you fly that flag in Nigeria, you could be shot dead. Hundreds of young people have been shot dead by the police simply for identifying with the indigenous people of Biafra and trying to stay at home every Monday to mourn the lives lost, the millions of lives lost during Biafra. This is an opportunity for the African diaspora to show more support and identification with the injustice being done to their brothers and sisters in Igbo land, and ask the Nigerian government to start a reparative justice program to recognize the wrongs done to the Igbo and try to make some amends. But also go beyond that to ask the British government to offer reparative justice for their role in engineering and orchestrating the genocide against the Igbo. Same to the Russian government, the inheritor of the state of the Soviet Union. I'm saying this because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And today in Nigeria, it is not only the Igbo who are demanding a referendum on the future of the country or a restructuring of the country. It is being done by the Yoruba nation, and in the north, using violent tactics, is being done by Boko Haram, demanding an Islamic state in Nigeria. These are things that could be solved through the democratic process, through a referenda, and not through the bullets and the killing, mostly in the Southeast against the Igbo, continuing as it were. So I would like to end here because there is a lot to say, but not enough time for me to go into much detail about it. And I would like to welcome your challenges, your questions, so that I can clarify some of what I've just said. Basically, that the Jamaicans, the Barbadians, the people in southern states of the United States identify strongly with the Igbo, but we don't recognize that much in our scholarship. We think that this identification is only deriving from the past connections with our people in the diaspora, but they are reminding us in their music that the connection is still current because there is still injustice being done to the Igbo, and they are against such injustice. You don't have to be Igbo to be against it. Wole Soyinka has written a lot about this injustice, and Wole is not Igbo. Fela Kuti has also spoken out against it, and Fela is not Igbo. But in other words, some of the people in the African diaspora who claim to be Igbo might not be Igbo by DNA, if there is such a thing, but they are consciously against the neo-colonial genocidal state that the Europeans imposed on us to continue fighting and killing one another in what Daddy Uroy calls tribal war in the ghetto. No more tribal war. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Agosino. Thank you very much. We have Professor Ian Isidro Smart in that panel. Professor Smart, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor. I don't know. Okay, I'll just read my paper. I won't make any comments on politics, especially politics within our ranks. Okay, my paper is revisiting Ivan van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus. Ivan van Sertima was born in Kitty in BG, what we used to call BG, which is now Guyana, in 1935. And he joined the ancestors in 2009. He was then living in the United States. By the way, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, if you can't tell from my where I speak. His book, They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in Ancient America, was published in 1976, the very year that the United States of America, at the peak of its global hegemony, was celebrating its 200th anniversary. And it was just 2 years earlier that Cheikh Anta Diop's foundational contribution to scholarship was introduced to the Anglophone academic world with the publication of Mercer Cook's The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Afrocentricity seemed to have made an impact on the world of academia. However, that impact was just a flash in the pan. Eurocentricity still reigns supreme. Now, in the penultimate year of the UN declared International Decade for People of African Descent, January 1, 2015 to December 31st, 2024. It is urgent that we revisit Van Sertima's seminal work as we move to attend to the admonition articulated by Bob Marley: emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds. It was the Honorable Marcus Garvey himself who, on the 1st of August, 1929, at Edelweiss Park in Kingston, Jamaica, first presented the status of African descendants as one of mental slavery. Now, one of the foundational beliefs of Western civilization is that Columbus discovered America. In the mid-1980s, the Western academic mainstream appointed a professor, a prominent classical scholar, classical in the sense of what they call classical as Greco-Latin. I think he also knew some Egyptology. Appointed this Martin Bernal, he was one of them, he was a white man, to ensure that the burgeoning Afrocentric scholarship would stay within the bounds of orthodoxy. However, on the very first page of the first volume of what was carded to be a 3-volume work establishing definitively the bounds of orthodoxy, Bernal declared, and I quote, "These volumes are concerned with 2 models of Greek history. One, viewing Greece as essentially European or Aryan, and that turns out to be what he would call the Aryan model. And the other, seeing it as Levantine, on the periphery of the Egyptian and Semitic cultural areas. That's what he called the ancient model. The ancient model was the conventional view among Greeks in the classical and Hellenistic ages. According to it, Greek culture had arisen as a result of colonization around 1500 BC by Egyptians and Phoenicians who had civilized the native inhabitants. End of quote. That's on page 1 of his book, of his book. Bernal, of course, knew full well that the people who, quote, civilized the native inhabitants end of quote, were people of jet black complexion, and for that reason called Ethiops, that's Ethiopians. They were the Nubians, the blameless Ethiops, of whom Homer speaks with absolute reverence. Bernal then goes on to assert, quote, most people are surprised to learn that the Aryan model developed only during the first half of the 19th century. Yeah, of course. The ancient model, which was conventional, was the conventional view among Greeks in the classical and Hellenistic ages, proved to be a major embarrassment for Europeans who, no, this is not Bernal anymore, this is me. Proved to be a major embarrassment for Europeans who had, in absolute defiance of all the norms of civilized behavior through chattel slavery of the Ethiops and the conquest of America, they are taking control of the planet by the end of the 18th century. So the Aryan ideologues invented the big lie. That's the real big lie. That is the Aryan model. The big lie that is white supremacy, and it serves as the very foundation stone of Western civilization. The big lie is the foundational alternative fact of the assertion that Columbus discovered America. Oh, sorry, the big lie, the alternative fact of and the assertion that Columbus discovered America is but one of a plethora of falsehoods derived from the big lie. Van Sertima states clearly in the final paragraph of his introduction, I quote, what I have sought to do in this book, therefore, is to present the whole picture emerging from these disciplines, all the facts that are now known about the links between Africa and America in the pre-Columbian times, end of quote. The most remarkable element of the whole picture, as Van Sertima calls it, would clearly have to be those colossal stone heads. And I quote from Van Sertima. There were 11 Negroid colossi in all found in the Olmec world. 4 of these dominated the La Venta site. The Negroid heads are full-bodied, realistic sculptures of great size, nearly 10 times larger than life. End of quote. Furthermore, this is important, it's from Van Sertima, the living human figures upon which these heads were modeled could not have appeared at La Venta later than 680 BC. They could not have appeared later than 680 BC and could have entered the Gulf of Mexico anytime between the average 800 BC and 680 BC date, a period which roughly spans the 25th dynasty of Egypt. Van Sertima's chapter, this is interesting. Van Sertima's chapter, The Mariner Prince of Mali, presents the story of Abu Bakari, quote, the second grandson of a daughter of Sunjata. And of course, Sunjata was the founder of the Mali kingdom. Van Sertima writes that according to very credible ancient records, Abu Bakari in 1311, that's AD, our period, set out on a major transatlantic expedition with 200 master boats and 200 supply boats. Furthermore, Van Sertima declares the major inventions in maritime navigation that were to transform European shipping during the Renaissance had been made before Christ and were completely lost to Europe during the Dark Ages. And of course, it's we the Black Muslims, the Moors, who brought the European tribes back in connection with or interconnection with the main stream of civilization. And of course, we talked about it in Professor Viana's presentation, the idea of water connects. Water connects. We had been traveling the oceans before Christ. We were traveling the oceans, we Africans. Van Sertima's book sent shockwaves that rocked the white supremacist academic world to its core. It is particularly significant that his book came just 2 years after the publication of the African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Unfortunately for the white supremacist academy, it was too late to rid themselves of the nuisance that Van Sertima had become, since he had already earned indefinite tenure at Rutgers University. However, they employed every dirty trick within the strict bounds of the law to exclude him from the upper ranks of academe. He was never promoted to the rank of full professor. He died as an associate professor. Inspired by Van Sertima, in 1994, I founded Original World Press, OWP, with the motto, scholarship to the people to scholarship. And in 1996, OWP published Amazing Connections, Kemet to Hispanophone Africana Literature. As the back cover blurb indicates, in this book, quote, the author seeks to connect contemporary Black literature in Spanish from Latin America to mankind's earliest civilization developed in the Nile Valley, end of quote. I have been in pursuit of the amazing connections since my days as a doctoral student at UCLA, way back in the 1970s. I had intended to entitle my doctoral dissertation, West Indianness in the Poetry of Nicolas Guillen. But this was deemed to be too radical. So I settled on, quote, the title, The Creative Dialogue in the Poetry of Nicolas Guillen, Europe and Africa. My first book, Central American Writers of West Indian Origin, a New Hispanic Literature, published in 1984 by 3 Continents Press of Washington, D.C. Continued the quest for connections, as did my third book, Nicolas Guillen, Popular Poet of the Caribbean, published in 1990 by the University of Missouri Press, Columbia, Missouri, and in London. My very latest book is written in Spanish and is entitled Amo mi raza, un enfoque africológico sobre la literatura hispanoamericana. I love my race, an africological focus on Hispanic American literature, and was released just a few weeks after What is Ukraine to Me? And this was in the fall, this was just a couple of months ago, in the fall of fall 2022. Let me talk a little bit about this book, What is Ukraine to Me? It is clear that the Ukraine conflict affects every one of the now 8 billion human beings living on planet Earth. The global North, having turned all of its attention to putting Putin in his place, has lost interest in protecting our planet from the ensuing catastrophe of climate change. Indeed, there are some few members of the political elite of the global North who have now raised the possibility of escalation to a nuclear conflict with the consequent total destruction of our beloved planet. That's what Ukraine is to us. The first chapter of my book, What is Ukraine to Me, is From Spin to Alternative Fact. And it brings to attention that there's no longer a commonly agreed upon set of indisputable facts. Everyone now has the right to adduce alternative facts to support his position. The second chapter, The Question of Invasion, shows that invasion of foreign nations is par for the course for American hegemony. Actually, I heard recently that that there are only 40 countries in the 40 nations in the entire world that were not invaded by Britain. Only 40 that were not invaded by Britain. So invasion is par for the course for all imperialist countries. The third chapter, Machiavelli or Maat, the Prince or the Teachings of Tao Tep, contrasts the statecraft advocated in Machiavelli's classic, first published in 1532, 5 years after his death. It contrasts this with the philosophical perspective presented in what is the oldest book in the world, written some 4,000 years earlier. That's the book by, that 4,000 years. The suggested date of publication is about, suggested time it was written was somewhere between 2388 and 2356 BC. 2388, 2356 BC, which has to be the oldest book in the world, written by an African from the Nile Valley, a Black African too, from the Nile Valley. In the 19th century, this book was so-called discovered by Europeans digging for treasure in Africa. It took the form of 14 pages of papyrus, nearly perfectly preserved, written in hieratic script of the ancient Egyptian language. Of course, the ancient Egyptian language is an African language. Chapter 4 of my book is Build Back Better, and it opens as follows. Western civilization is founded on white supremacy. That is white supremacy that is based on the big lie that is the Aryan model. In biblical terms, Western civilization is a house built on sand. Any attempt to quote unquote build back better is doomed to failure unless the foundation is fixed. My 5th chapter is Do for Self, ending the miseducation of the Negro. And it begins as follows. Marcus Mosiah Garvey's signature admonition to his people, do for self, amounts to a declaration of the stark reality that no one can be oppressed without his explicit or implicit complicity. That's from the book. Let me repeat. You can't be oppressed unless you're greeted. Oh, as I put it kind of colorfully, you can't have white supremacy without Black stupidity. Now, the back cover of the book in Spanish, Amor mi raza, I'll read from that back cover blurb in English. I'll read the translation. It was now 1 generation ago that the Panamanian man of words, Gerardo Maloney, made the vibrant poetic declaration, I love my race. Now, Ian Isidore Smart, a leading scholar in the field of Spanish American literature, has come along to present the academic foundations for Maloney's declaration. Smart explains that he loves his race because, as Leonardo both asserted, given that Africa is the cradle of humanity, we are all Africans. Furthermore, Cheikh Anta Diop established indisputably the African origin of civilization. And Ivan van Sertima showed that the evidence is incontrovertible that we Africans did in fact come to America before Columbus. Not only did we come before Columbus, but we showed Columbus the way. Most importantly, we gave the Europeans the knowledge and skills to sail across the oceans. And what is missed is that Spanish and Portuguese, but I speak now to Professor Viana, spoken by 200 million Latin Americans of African descent. That, in other words, there are 200 million, more than that, according to what the statistics Professor Viana gave us. There are 200 million, he said 240 million people of African descent who live who speak Spanish or Portuguese and living in Latin America. 200 million Black people in Latin America, in Central and South America, speaking either Spanish or Portuguese. Now, Spanish and Portuguese can be considered almost dialects of the same Hispano-Romance, of the same language, because they're almost mutually intelligible. But not only did the Spanish and Portuguese, this language, Hispano-Romance, of which Spanish and Portuguese are two major dialects, not only it was given by the Moors, Black Muslims, because not only did they bring civilization to the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, but the first written document in this Hispano-Romance was written in Mozarabe, was written first of all in Arabic script in Mozarabe, which was the dialect spoken by the Black Muslims in Spain. In other words, prior to that discovery in 1950 of these documents, of these certain documents from the earliest one is from 1040 AD. It was thought that the first written form of Spanish was a poem written in 1140. But it turned out that before that, the earliest written form of Spanish was these documents written in the Mozarabe dialect of Spanish, of Hispano-Romance. And more importantly, they were written in Arabic script, because at that time, we, the Black Muslims who came to Spain and brought civilization, we spoke Arabic as our official language, and then we picked up the Creole that was being developed by the Visigoths, who were conquered by the Romans. We picked up this language, which was broken down Vulgar Spanish, but which was developed into the Romance language, into the Hispano-Romance language, Spanish and Portuguese and so forth. But it was spoken by these people who were illiterate, so it wasn't written. But we being Africans of great culture, we did when we came upon, when we conquered the people, we didn't impose our culture on them. We adapted what was good in theirs, and so we spoke. Our official language at that time was Arabic, but we spoke the language of the people, of the natives, which was Hispano-Romance, but it wasn't written. So we, in order to write it, we used the Arabic script. So the first written document in Hispano-Romance was written in Arabic script and by the Mozarabe dialect of Hispano-Romance. And now, recently people have been talking about something called Ajami, which is a way of writing African languages in Arabic script. Well, that's how Spanish began. Yeah. And the Moors brought the gift of civilization to the Aryans after the Dark Ages. And it was from the Nile Valley that civilization came to Greece. So, as the International Decade for People of African Descent comes to an end, the declaration, I am somebody, has to reverberate among the over 2 billion people of African descent who inhabit the planet. We need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. This is what revisiting Van Sertima can achieve. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Smart. I don't see the other presenters in this panel. So that gives us some time for discussion of two wonderful presentations by, two wonderful individuals, one still within the UWI, University of the West Indies. One has migrated, that is Biko, from Trinidad, but he's still one of us. So, so we can now have, if you intend to ask questions, please be brief. Also comments, be brief. I've been learning a lot from the two presentations. Please indicate, go to the reactions panel at the bottom and raise your hand. Yeah, that's my mama, Professor Mofolabo Ajayi Soyinka. Over to you, ma.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Oh, well, it's morning here. And I want to thank our presenters. that I've heard this morning, the three presenters that I've heard this morning, everything is so interlinked and interwoven. But let me start with the last speaker on the came before Columbus. When I moved to the US in the early late 80s, I met that controversy, the controversy that met that book. One professor, one white woman, I've forgotten her name, was really tearing it to pieces. And I think, my reaction was, there we go again, or here we go again. When Africans make known their contribution to knowledge, we are consistently destroyed. It's like, no, you don't exist. And that's one big thing that that Europeans have had over us, the way they claim the absolute knowledge to themselves. And you're right, we need to free ourselves, because I've talked of internalization of inferiority. And I think that is the problem that is dogging us, people of African descent, because of our recent past history of colonization. We have internalized all the negative things that Europeans have used, or the European colonizers have used to suppress us, to destroy us, and to demolish our own civilization and our contribution towards civilization, such that we fail, or we now believe that we have nothing to contribute. And it's getting worse and worse with the younger generation. For example, I was on a platform, we're discussing the one device used in United Arab Emirates, UAE, to gather moist and create rain, which is using modern technology and all the fancy things. So the thing was explained. And my comment was, maybe it is time for us to take another look at our traditional ancient rainmakers in various cultures. And this young guy said, oh no, that won't do. That's calling for whatever. It's going to be retrogressive. These rainmakers, they use their knowledge to create destruction, blah, 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 and just went on and on and on. And I said, have you studied them? You are coming from the perspective of the colonizer who said, who dismissed what we had. What aspect of our society, when we have people who are willing, who are negative enough, is not used destructively? We have medications. We also have killer drugs. It's part of our scientific knowledge. So we use knowledge, these drugs to kill, and those who want to use to kill. It's the same thing with the fireworks. The Chinese used fireworks for entertainment. The Europeans took it a notch higher, and it became a weapon of mass destruction. So, I mean, the young man finally agreed, but we went on a long way. But this is an educated young man who has internalized all the pejorative attributions given to us. Earlier on, and I'll finish quickly, earlier on we're talking about language as communication. We had that dispute, but even the choice of words that we use when we talk about ourselves, or we use in describing what we have done. For example, we say colonial masters. I refuse to use that word, colonial masters. They are colonial rulers, not my masters. They imposed themselves on us. We also talk of, civilized. There was a time we used the word civilization to describe Western cultures, and then we talk of tradition, in talking of African cultures. And we had our own civilization. We just need to focus and look at our own civilization, what we have created and what we have contributed to world knowledge. Let me stop there. Thank you very much again for your presentations.
Thank you very much. I think Professor Smart, you will probably agree with most of what she said, you know.
Yeah, totally.
If you wish.
Yeah, I'm
I
totally
believe that
agree with
Professor Agostinho would agree very much with what Professor Ajayi Soyinka has said.
Yeah. I just want to point out something. You talked about Ubuntu. But you know, as I tell people, I'm a Catholic in spite of being an intelligent African. But there's a theological idea in Catholicism which we seem to have forgotten about. The idea of the mystical body of Christ. That is that we're all one. That to me is an expression of Ubuntu. So I've been throwing that out recently, and people have been wondering what am I talking about. But another thing too, the whole question of I say it with sort of tongue in cheek and a little bit cheekily, the idea that you can't have white supremacy or black stupidity, and people take exception to that. But that's another way of saying emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. So if we free our minds, then that's getting away from some stupidity. but probably a little bit too I'm probably a little bit too strong in my but you cannot, it cannot work. White supremacy works on our mental enslavement, on our thinking that we have nothing. Look, the oldest book in the world was written 4,000 years before Machiavelli. And it contains an approach to life, an approach to statecraft that is fundamentally that is honest and is fruitful, and that we must return to if we're to save the world from the destruction that we are going into now with Ukraine. With Ukraine, we could probably end up in a nuclear escalation could lead us to nuclear war, and therefore to the total destruction of humanity, because people are following the Machiavellian approach rather than the Maat approach, which was advocated by Tao Tep in his book written 2388 BC. And he was an African. So all of these things we need to use to build our self-confidence and to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, so we can free our minds and stop the nonsense.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Feyichitan Ijimakinwa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. I am speaking from the University of Ibadan, Institute of African Studies. And I want to say those are fantastic papers. I will be engaging the two papers, but let me start with Professor Agostinho. Finally, there's a face to the name. And it is indeed a very great pleasure hearing you deliver what I call a thought-provoking presentation. Thought-provoking and actively engaging. For me, I think just before this panel started, Professor Belaji had mentioned the relative popularity and acceptance that Yoruba language has received outside Nigeria. So much to the point that even in a country like Brazil, it is accepted as a language. But considering the population of those that came from the Bight of Biafra, Bight of Benin, and taken out of Nigeria, and the cultural influence that they enjoy in places like Barbados, Jamaica, southern part of the United States, I think the activism and the movement necessary to push Igbo language to such a point of prominence and cultural appropriation, I think we need to do more. And I love what you said. Scholarship has been rather silent on that. And if the vehicle of scholarship is used to drive it, I think it will be a better cultural umbrella for Igbo people in the diaspora or those who identify as Igbo. I love something that you said. You mentioned that in identifying or knowing who you are, maybe DNA is one of the things you can use, but you said something, Professor Agosino said, that is if there's anything like DNA, and I caught that. And I love his contention with science, with that branch of science, because for us in Africa, and with our knowledge, we don't need DNA to establish some things. You just know, everybody, we know who is from where. There are traits to look out for. There are parts, and I mean, of you that are common to the other persons that you just know that, oh, there are some commonalities between us. Be that as it may, I love the parallelism that's drawn between Igbo language and the Jamaican patois, or part of the strands of Jamaican language, and as established. And I would love to hear more of his translations of Igbo, reggae music or reggae numbers into Igbo language. It is very, very fantastic. Thank you very much, Professor Agosino. Professor Smart, it's very interesting because just today, this morning, I was talking to one of my students that I'm going to send her a copy of Ivat Setima's They Came Before Columbus. And she had asked me that what's the book about, and I just gave her a brief rundown of the book, and she was astounded that, wow, you mean we actually did this? You mean we actually crossed the ocean? You mean navigation and building of big ship did not start with the Europeans? And it's just, Van Setima wrote this book in the 70s, and right now we can't even get. And I love what Prof. Shoyinka just said. It is sad that in this generation, as those in the vanguard of Africanism, Afrocentrism are passing away, we've been sold the lie of globalization. We've been sold the lie of technology, which suppresses our own indigenous knowledge, yet gives everything that humanity needs now to Europeans. That is the sad aspect. Yes, everybody is good, we're doing well, we want to do well. Oh, technology is aging development. However, it's sad. It's silent. It's very, very mild. But technology today is no longer given even a space, a window, or a voice to Africans, our indigenous knowledge, and its contribution to modern technology. So as it is, they found another way to tell us that AI, machine learning, information technology, where can Africa feature in this? So, and that's why I'm not surprised that the young man that Professor Shoyinka mentioned could say, oh, please don't let us go the way of the rainmaker. They just don't feature in this. But we are saying that we need to tell our stories. Our narration, our narrative must be told by ourselves. And as much as we've been able to achieve that considerably in present realities, I think they are snuffing, they are putting out the light on or in our side of the room. So we need to switch on the light. We need to be at the switch and to make sure that the focus is equal so that nobody is relegated in any way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Professor Biko Agosino, any comment?
Yes, thank you, Professor Bewaji, Eshel, for all the comments and supporting reflections. I want to agree with Professor Shoyinka on the importance of not neglecting our own research and development in indigenous knowledge systems, because they are important. This was emphasized for us by C.L.R. James in The Black Jacobins, where he stated that voodoo was the medium of the conspiracy because people were sworn to secrecy in the planning of the Haitian Revolution. But unfortunately, the leadership of the revolution did not look at voodoo as being as important as the ordinary masses saw it to be as a technology for fighting against injustice. So they banned the practice of voodoo among the revolutionaries, which led a group of the revolutionaries to join the other side and start fighting for the Bokra, the white man. Divided and weakened the revolution. They could have achieved a lot more if they had adopted the principle of religious freedom, the respect for different religious faith, the way we do in Africa. In one family, you can have a Christian, a Muslim, and a traditional worshiper living together in the same family without quarrel, as Wole Soyinka showed us in his lectures at Harvard University of Africa, saying that in religion, Africa could offer the world a better practice compared to the repressive practices of the Europeans, even against their own people. And on that note, the Jamaicans and the people in the diaspora, especially in the Caribbean, have a belief in what is known as Obia. Obia meaning people who can use magic or spirituality or knowledge of herbs, as Professor Soyinka just said, to harm or to heal people. But Obia is in Igbo, literally this heart, Obi, Obia, this Obi, Obia, this heart. The Obi, your heart, can be a good heart or it can be an evil heart. If you have an evil heart, you wish people ill. If you have a good heart, you pray for people and bless them. So the Jamaicans call that the black heart man, the black heart man, the man who has a black heart, who can harm people simply by thinking bad about them. But they see Obia not simply as a technology to do harm, they see it as a technology for healing, for protection from people who could do harm against anyone. So that's another of the, yes, voodoo is a critical piece because in Benin Republic today, it is the state religion. But maybe they shouldn't make it a state religion. They should leave it to the conscience of individuals to worship Chukwu, God, the way that they want to worship Chukwu. That was one of the remarks that Kwai-No made in his interesting narrative, that the God that the white man worshipped looked a lot like the God that his village worshipped in Igbo land, that is Chukwu, the great God. But the difference is that the white man is not as kind, as moral, and as clean as would be expected of a worshiper of the great God. They were cruel, they were wicked, and they were brutal against innocent people like himself. But you know what Kwai-No was saying there is true, because Christianity is not a white man's religion. It is a religion that was taken to Europe by Africans. It was Africans who evangelized Europeans, but the Europeans took the religion and weaponized it against Africans and against the rest of the world. So that's one of the things that we can benefit from studying our indigenous knowledge systems and the ways that we are connected to each other. Having said that, I would like us to also consider that maybe one of the resolutions from this colloquium would be a resolution calling on the country of Jamaica to follow the example of the country of Barbados and offer Nigerians visa-free travel. And Nigeria should reciprocate, maybe even take the lead by offering Jamaicans visa-free travel and the right to dual citizenship if they want it, given the historical connections between us. That can be done, but we can also rise from this conference and with a resolution calling on the federal government of Nigeria to stop what Ganifawo Himmi called executive lawlessness and follow the order of the court and release Nnamdi Kanu from detention, unlawful detention, because he has been acquitted and freed by the courts, the law courts in Nigeria. And maybe the government of Nigeria, we can urge them immediately to set up a reparations fund for the Igbo genocide. Even if it is a token or symbolic fund, it will serve to re-educate the conscience of our people to know that we are brothers and sisters, and that before we were colonized, as Walter Rodney said in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, there was never a tribal genocide against the Igbo by their neighbors. That genocidal practice came with colonialism and neocolonialism. Walter Rodney said it wasn't a tribal war, because if you call it a tribal war, then you would be mistaken, because the Labour Party government of the UK was not an African tribe, and Shell BP was not an African tribe. Thank you.
I want to
Smart.
Yeah, I want to jump in. The question of languages, there are two things. The question of languages, you must be careful about the divide and conquer, policy, which has worked so well for the brutalizer, for the savage barbarians who exploited us. I was proposing. I know I was get strong feedback, but I get some resistance from this. That if you think about it, is there any official intellectual, that's somebody with a degree or something, or the degree, African intellectual on the planet, who is not at least familiar with English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese? So what could we consider them as Pan-African languages? And of course, you know, English comes from England and all that, but the English, for instance, a man like Earl Lovelace uses in his masterful book is not the same English as D.H. Lawrence. So we are creating our own English that Chinua Achebe uses is not the same English as a British as a London writer. So it's more practical for us to, I would think, to have these languages. They might have started as European languages, but that's okay, because the European languages started as African languages in the long run. And then another matter on the question of indigenous knowledge. It's not indigenous. It's human knowledge, because everything that Europe has came from us. Everything that they have all the knowledge that they have came from us. We are the ones who invented mathematics and everything. We first people talk about our literature being oral. No, it wasn't oral. We're the first people to write books. The book by Tautep is 2388 BC, between 2388 and 2356 BC. The first Homer's book is Homer's, if Homer wrote it all, because he was a blind man, but in any case, it's probably, the things are attributed to him up from 1000 BC. That's 1300 years after Tautep. And the Bible Genesis is about 1000 BC to the first book. So this thing about us being oral and all, you've got to stop that nonsense. You've got to stop that nonsense, because that's what keeps us oppressed. What I kind of cheekily call stupidity. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. I think the point made by both of you are very, very significant. You know, I have often said that the first cities, mega cities, were in Africa. How would you administer, protect the logistics of law and order, security, food, you know, governance could never have been done in an oral society. And if you understand that hieroglyphics was one of the oldest systems of writing. But I think the challenge is that most of our academics are just lazy. And because of the laziness, you know, we just latch onto whatever is given from anywhere and we run with it and we don't even ask ourselves, does this make sense? So, Professor Ademowo, your hand was up. Are you still with us?
Yes, I'm with you, Prof.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, let me first thank you for a wonderful contribution. I am of the opinion that we need this kind of forum. Let me thank Professor Bewaji, Emeritus Professor Bewaji, for this kind of forum, for us to take a critical look at the place of Africa in the global community. We try to channel the path. I am particularly worried at this point, we need to move beyond the rhetorics. We need to move beyond the rhetorics. We need to look at what is more practicable and how we can have African voice in the global knowledge system. And that is why I appreciate recent work by Professor Toyin Falola, because I'm also looking at ethnography, seeing how we can write ourselves into the global epistemic frame, in the sense that ethnography, most of us, or some of us, people like Professor Bewaji and co, have really gotten to a point where they understood most of the issues we are dealing with. They have the background experience from the African society. They could write a way, they could be able to write into the knowledge system in a way that we will be able to incorporate, because with all due respect, there is no way we are going to move away from these colonial masters or colonial rulers, just like the other prof said. They are everywhere. They are affecting our lives. In fact, the way we are looking at the larger picture, in our homes in Africa, I'm a Yoruba man, our children cannot speak our language anymore. They don't. There is this syndrome, my son does not understand Yoruba syndrome that we are battling with. The language, this attitude towards indigenous language. All these are very, very, they have very critical role to play in the parts, as the channel parts of our development. So what I'm saying, in other words, I think it's time for us to explore part of our ethnography, to find a way of bringing some of this knowledge that some of these professors, some of these learned in some of this practical world, people like who have experienced what the implication of our voodoo, our African Jew, African tradition do for them to write it, so that we'll be able to find a way, whether validate or not, or later on in life, we'll know that it is there in the knowledge system. Well, the Western canon for validation is another problem. But the reality is that someone has taken that route to write something that we could, they could feel the experience with. Because ethnography allow for experience sharing in vis-a-vis the dynamic nature of the social sciences and humanities. We could feel what others, they feel that we have the broad knowledge of. And that is what we need to do at this point.
Some of these things are, for instance, Igbo preparation, borderline. Some of these are broader issues, which I feel that it's about governance. And we know we have failed system in Africa. But what I'm advocating for right now is that we're at the point where so many of African scholars have experience in this so-called the colonial master's knowledge system. We need to now go back and now incorporate our own local system into this and find a way to bring the originality out, that some of them are not different from us. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Just as you rightly mentioned, the success of the miseducation of the educated is very deep. In my own family, none of my own children have any foreign names. They all have only Yoruba names. And I make sure that I speak to them in Yoruba. And when they speak back to me in English, I just refuse to answer until they can, tell me whatever is the matter with them in Yoruba language. And they have found it to be very useful, even today. They are all over the place now in their own, and they have found that when there is need to communicate, we can speak a language nobody around them would understand. And that's the beauty of it. So thank you very much for that PowerPoint. I don't know how we get to our community back home in Africa, that being civilized doesn't mean losing your language. Thank you. General Shola Williams wanted to, I believe, make a comment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm coming down to the practical level. First of all, I will not advise Jamaica to allow free entry to Nigerians. I've been to about 61 countries in this world, and I see the situation of 61 countries, Asia, Latin, the 5 continents, Australia, and I've seen the conditions of Nigerians. Antigua and Barbuda, they have a problem right now because they allow airplanes to be flying from Nigeria straight to Antigua and Barbuda. And they have a lot of Nigerians now, they don't know what to do with them. So let us be serious practically. Second point I want to make, I was very happy when I saw the Atilogu dancers in the background of Biko. So I want to say the alumni for that one. But the point is this, in case of indigenous knowledge, Professor Bowajitu knows, you can get a PhD in indigenous knowledge in Australia University in South Africa. There are about 2 or 3 centers for indigenous knowledge in South Africa, including a class 2 UNESCO one. In Nigeria, at the University of Ibadan, they have a center for indigenous knowledge. What are they doing there and what are they producing? But Northwest and some other centers in South Africa, they are producing a lot indigenous knowledge. AU created about 10 years, 20 years ago, African Academy of African Languages with the headquarters in Bamako, in Mali. Next week, they're having a conference in Dakar, all on African languages. UNESCO has come up with a decade of indigenous languages with a special focus on Africa up to 2030 or 2022, okay? All these things are happening. What are the other academics, like Eboaji said, come together to say, okay, we are going to support all these people. Note also too, that Akalan academy I'm talking about cannot survive without UNESCO and donors. These donors are also pushing their own language, British Council, French Center, USAID, and so on. They are pushing their own languages too, and you are competing with them. African Union has introduced Swahili. Tanzania says they are going to support Swahili. Where Tanzania got the money to support Swahili? What did Tanzania do recently? As from now on, they are going to start using English in secondary and tertiary institutions because they discovered their graduates cannot compete. with other parts of the world. And English has become the international language for business and everything. They have changed. Algeria has now made it compulsory. You learn French, you learn English, apart from Arab, compulsorily in this thing. So let us be serious when we make some of these propositions. And finally, I want to make one point. For the past 6-7 years, I've been trying to get any country in Africa. I'm trying to convince Cote d'Ivoire now to organize a traditional music festival. No rap, no hip hop, just traditional one with only indigenous African music, African instruments, and so on. Again, it's only South Africa in Africa that has an indigenous African symphony orchestra. And they have 1 or 2 museums in Rose Scholar and Virtue of Zululand, where you can see African instruments. Niger, in their museum, has some African instruments. In case of Yoruba, I've approached University of Ibadan, Institute of African Studies, Lagos State University. Why don't you organize a Yoruba festival that will bring people from the diaspora? Yoruba dress, Yoruba dish, Yoruba that. Last point I want to make. African fabrics. I wanted to organize, again, a workshop in Nigeria, or conference in Nigeria, where people who are making African fabrics from all parts of Nigeria to come and display the African fabrics. It is not.
General Williams, fortunately for us, Professor Jimakinwa is here. Professor Felicita, I believe he's taking notes. I have a couple of hands up that we would like to take. Cecil Johnson.
Good morning, everybody. I have to say I'm enjoying myself, calling in from Chicago, but originally from Jamaica. I am an African. General, I don't agree with you when you say that the English should be compulsory, because that is just really expediency. And I encourage you to read the book Malidoma Somé of Water and Spirit, because it gave me such a clear way of how they broke us, right? When they kidnapped him at 5 years old, and then he was not allowed, he had to wear their clothes, then he had to learn some French, and once he learned their language, he was not allowed to speak in his own language. So I have friends who are Yoruba, and there are things when we are talking, they say, I cannot even express it to you because there's no translation. I think that the same way that I speak English and I speak Patois, that we were forcibly taught other people's languages, that we must make the same effort as African people to create. And I think the African Union has mentioned Swahili. And because they have not been able to teach it, does not mean that we should get rid of it or the idea. What we need to do is to work harder, right? So I feel that there are things that we lose when we don't speak them in our indigenous tongue. Just like when I'm speaking with my auntie or others, I just lapse into Patois. Or if you get me real upset, I might lapse into some now here too, right? It's and not upset in a bad way, but upset like or emotional or excited, or I might lapse into Patois too. So I don't agree that we should.
So you don't want to get ignorant, my sister.
No, definitely not. Me and the general go back a long way. So but I just want to say that because as I'm listening to the professor talk about Igbo, I'm so fascinated because my daughter's DNA show Igbo in it. So I am Igbo too, and I'm also Mende, right? So I know I have the diaspora, maybe because we in the diaspora lost so much. No, I feel that we should try to learn indigenous languages and all the innuendos and nuances behind what these things mean, because that will help me to become whole, right? And I also feel that It is something that I'm going to be addressing tomorrow because I had wanted to talk about connecting African with the diaspora through African-centered curriculum. If the British, I was born in Jamaica, and when I left school at 15 and came to the United States, I was totally able to assimilate because all the things that I had learned had prepared me for this. I had not even learned about Marcus Garvey. Can you imagine? Who is our national hero? And I had not even learned about Marcus Garvey in my own so-called excellent education. So part of what has happened to us is the continuous indoctrination. And this is something I will talk about tomorrow. When you became allegedly free, right? Independent. Imagine you've only been colonized less than 100 years, 1885, maybe starting in the 1900s, and then independence in the 1950s. And you done lost your darn selves. I mean, come on now. So the problem that we have had is coming into independence, we have kept all of the colonial institutions and we then claim them as our own. So that's why we in the problem that we're in now, because we forgot all of the ways of our ancestors who you had for thousands of years, kept these colonial institutions as your foundation. And then you created what we see now, that we now have to unravel our minds. So General, respectfully, we can have a talk after. I don't support this English compulsory, and I speak English very well, right? And yes, our people should know more than one language. So yes, if it's an international business language, etc., then yes, it's part of one of the things we must know, but not to the negation of all the other languages that we need to take the time to learn, right? Because as African people, we need to have a language that we can speak to each other with, and we must make that time. And that's why, among these esteemed people who are here, create the curriculum that makes it easy, create the songs that help us to do. I have friends here who are working on curriculum for 3 to 5 year olds, and it's very language, whole body based and using songs and all of that. We are a people who love that. When the professor talked about reggae music and how when he hears it, what it means to him. These are some of the same people that I love to listen to. And it's so inspiring to me to see how it connected with him as an Igbo person, and how it connected with me coming from Jamaica, and that we were both feeling the same thing. So I think that we should begin to figure out ways that we can grow ourselves, become more of an African, less of a European, not buy into the foolishness of how we were colonized, because in Jamaica, whatever I was learning in elementary school was what you were learning in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Trinidad, in all of the English-speaking countries. And when we all went to high school, we were all doing the GCE. So we were all being programmed to learn the same thing. And tomorrow, when I speak, I will talk to you about what was behind that. They knew what they wanted to create in the adult, right? So they laid that foundation through their curriculum, through their education. And so we as African people are struggling with issues of identity, and we will continue to struggle with issues of identity until we learn to respect that we as Africans, as the gentleman, so many people have spoken before, we are the first people on the earth. Are we going to let the baby tell us what to do? And because it is expedient now, no, we must look within. And we must be looking to pull Africa together with her diaspora, and less to worry about what Europe and America and Canada and all these other people doing, because these people don't know civilization, right? Because look at the state of the world. We're in a war right now for what? The gentleman talked about us being pulled into this war. I say focus on within, and let's try to build our relationships. Because when they finish destroying themselves, we will still be here, okay? We're the first people, we're gonna be the last people. The first shall become last, the last shall become first. We are moving into our time. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That is wonderful. Thank you. Let's take the last comments before the responses from our presenters. Dr. Joy Ifeanyi Osa.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm first of all going to greet you all in the languages that I speak, because first of all, I want to say Ekason, Dalunu.
Ekason.
Bonjour à tous, Nimen Hao, Guten Morgen. I want to go back to what Professor Bewaji said about language and identity. And I want to say to us as scholars that your language is your identity. Your language takes you back to your roots. I remember growing up, my late dad said, anywhere you get to in the world, say, Epadomo Salani, I'm from Edo in West Africa. And just by the fact that I spoke Lani, somebody was able to trace my origin and knew that I came from a royal background. So I want to say that we should, as scholars, begin to encourage our indigenous languages, especially for kids that are coming up, because it is your identity. Now at Rhodes University, if you write your thesis, either a master's or a PhD program, you are allowed to write your thesis, the abstract of your thesis, in your own language. You write the English, and then the language that you feel you want to communicate with other than English. Rhodes University has given platforms to postgraduate students to be able to write an abstract so that they can reach out, because language is your identity, and to create cultural diversity. Now, for those of us in translation and interpretation, I want to give you an example. You will be able to say and translate or interpret what someone is saying, but when you say it in the original language, the person who you are speaking with gets it clearly. For example, when I say, Kiarin, Kiapo, ni yeni yeni, I have said it in Yoruba language, and I'm going to be able to translate it in English and in French. But a Yoruba origin speaker would understand the meaning of Kiarin, Kiapo, ni yeni yeni. You know, and then when you say, I have said that in Yoruba language, I would translate it in English and I'll translate it in French. Donc, c'est un peu ça. Si vous n'êtes pas capable de parler la langue, comment dirais-je maintenant, la langue locale, ça devient un problème pour la personne. Oh, sorry, I started speaking French. So, what I want to say is our language is our identity, and we should begin to encourage indigenous languages. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Smart, Professor Agostino, any comments, responses?
Yes, I would like to agree with the comments on the importance of our indigenous languages. And I count Patois and Creole as part of our indigenous languages, just as I would count Pidgin English as part of our indigenous languages. I have been developing a theory that I call LICE, Linguistics Industrial Complex Economy, which recognizes language as one of the factors of production, as important as land, labor, and capital. And I've tried to explore this hypothesis by looking at all the countries at the top of the league table of Human Development Index, compiled by the United Nations Development Program. And one thing you can see from that table is that all the top countries in Human Development Index are the countries that rely on their own indigenous languages for development purposes. Whereas the countries that we are forced to adopt or we are forced to follow colonial languages that were imposed on them continue to struggle in economic development. So that is why part of the reason why you would find African countries at the bottom of the Human Development Index. Clarion call for Africans to continue to develop our own indigenous languages, 2,000 languages in Africa. So that is a challenge not only to the government or the governments in Africa, but to us as intellectuals. If you have written some things in English or French, try to write some things in your own indigenous languages, the way Ngugi wa Thiong'o has been teaching us, that our minds are colonized if we cannot write and read in our own indigenous languages. Yes, we should continue to write and read in the languages that we're most comfortable reading and writing in, but we should not exclude our own indigenous languages, because language is a technology for development. And you see this technology being used by the African youth in what is known as Niger music, that young people from all over the world, including European youth, are learning to sing along to, even though they are not singing in English. The songs of that General Ishola wanted to organize a festival for are already there on the ground, and they are big revenue earners for Nigeria. The same way that reggae music came out without wanting to speak the Queen's English. They used patois and made a name for themselves globally using language as a factor of production. So I agree with that emphasis, and that is something I'm doing. Some of the things I write in Igbo, even if not everyone can read them, but eventually there will be translations to other languages to make them more accessible across the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me add something. I'm come from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm a professor of Spanish. I have the PhD in Hispanic American literature, Spanish American literature. I did my MA in Mexico, I did it in Latin American literature in Mexico. Okay, so and then my wife is from Panama. She's a Black woman from Panama, and we speak. So she speaks Spanish as well as English. So look, I have a perspective on this thing that comes from 78 years of existence on this planet, and I'm thinking about this thing. I think we should be and I know that I've always run into the problems when I start talking about language and because people this idea of speaking, the idea of what is language? What is language is when I write. I write if I'm writing a scholarly thing, I write sort of in the prestige dialect. But if I'm going to write if I was going to write a novel fiction, I write in a language that's closer to something between what you speak at home and what you have to speak in the university. So we have to think about this thing. Isn't it more practical to? I know I run into trouble with this. Isn't it more practical for people to just learn to work in for instance, I heard somebody saying that Cubans and Jamaica. Cuba is so close to Jamaica, but the basic Cubans, the Black Cubans, can't talk to the Black Jamaicans because one speaks Spanish and one speaks English. Okay. And then somebody suggested, why don't they learn Swahili so they can speak to each other? That doesn't make any sense. So there are lots of things that need to be thought through more carefully. And I haven't written anything about it, but I'm going to start writing about this idea of what language are we going to speak? Example, I'm working now on the question of the language called Palenquero, which is a kind of patois, what you call patois Creole down in Colombia. And it's having the same fate as so-called patois in Jamaica and all that. I mean, people are moving away from it into prestige dialects of Spanish. Well, that's interesting. But then what I'm looking at is this Palenquero. They say was the experts say is influenced by Bantu languages. Okay, that's exciting. But then I also am looking at Egypt, the hieroglyphs, the Middle Egyptian, and there's some people who say that Middle Egyptian came out of the Sudan, out of Kush, which came out of deeper down into the heart of Africa, out of the Bantu languages. So I'm saying, look, isn't that an interesting circle? Yeah, the Egyptian comes ultimately out of the same place that Palenquero comes out of. So we need to think about, approach these things and see what they can do for us to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, because we are still enslaved if we think in terms of the terms in which we think of, in which we approach these things, do come from the person who brutalized us, who brutalized us. This is just of course I'm talking like a like a real scholar, kind of throwing out some ideas. I haven't come to any conclusion as yet. I'm just thinking about these things.
Thank you so much. I think that we've had, I don't see any more hands up for questions. So I want to thank our presenters, Professor Smart and Professor Agosino. You see, we've had 3 papers today, and I believe that while I would have wanted everybody on the two panels to be here, as well as for the other panel that we missed to have been here, I believe that having 3 papers in about 3 hours or more has actually given us plenty of time to rub minds and discuss more. So I want to thank both of you, and I want to thank everybody who have stayed with us. I want to say that thank you. Tomorrow, I think this brings us to a close of day 1 of the colloquium, which started at 6 a.m. and is 10:06 here now. In Nigeria, that will be 4:06. In South Africa, that will be 5:06. In Mauritius, that will be about 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. there. And in India, that probably is about 11 p.m. or something. So I want to thank everyone as we come to the close of today. Please give yourself a hand of applause. And I hope we'll be able to meet again tomorrow at 6 a.m. The series of scientific sessions will start. Thank you very much. Bless you. Oh, the recordings, the recorded, everything is being recorded. Thanks to Panabstrag, our host body from Lagos, Nigeria. Everything is being recorded and will be available. And also, including those who have not presented, we have publishers who are interested in disseminating the products from this colloquium. We will work out the modalities and come back to you to suggest how best to proceed. Thank you so much.